I'm calling to order the special board meeting of the CUSD Board of Education for March 4th, 2025. Welcome, everyone. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Trustee Zhao,
Here.
Trustee Chow,
Present.
Trustee Leong,
Here.
Trustee Manhattan,
Here.
Trustee Liu.
Here. Okay, then 1.2, flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, everyone. And then the next item is board agenda approval. Could I get a motion, please?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay,
second.
Satish and, okay, and Long seconded, roll call vote, please.
Yes. Trustee Zhao,
Aye.
Trustee Chow,
Aye.
Trustee Leong,
Aye.
Trustee Liu,
Aye.
Trustee Manhattan.
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right, then the next item, public comments. And because this is a special meeting, we're only gonna take comments that are for items on the agenda. Do we have any comments tonight?
We do. We have comments for items 4.1 and and 5.2.
Okay, we'll take those then when we get there. 4.1 and 5.2. Right. Great, thank you. Okay, then moving on, item 4.1, this is a second interim financial report.
I will kick us off.
Thank you.
So tonight we are bringing forward for the information item only is our second interim. And again, this will share what assumptions we are using to build out our multi-year as well as share where we are with our budget second interim. If you remember, we had first interim back in December, had shared some of the identified areas of that we needed to focus on as we move forward. Some of those we're looking at different cost reductions. And so we have brought forward a plan tonight that again is just for you to review with the intention it would be approved at the following board meeting to meet that county deadline, March 15th. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Tina, who are going to walk us through. One of the things that we would ask is, because there is a lot of information in the slides, is if they have an opportunity to go through the entire slide presentation, because some of your questions might be answered as they go through it, and then we can certainly come back and answer any of those questions. So I would just say if you could mark notes on the pages, that may be easier reference, and then we can flip back to that side at the conclusion of it. So I'm going to turn over to Chris.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Stacey, and welcome everybody. Tonight, our plan is to go through the second interim report. This is our second opportunity during the school year to present to the board and the community what our current fiscal situation is. So why don't we start with the next first slide? All right. So as Stacey mentioned, we brought to you first interim a couple months back in December. We presented to you first interim, and now second interim is the update and reflecting of our financial books as of January 31st. Some of the things obviously that's built into our interim reports are budgetary assumptions, and we'll talk a little bit more about the particulars, but I just want to mention that the assumptions that we talk about tonight are just assumptions that we know of as of this time. These assumptions will change. They will change between now and actually when we come back to you and ask you to consider a budget for next year. So really it's based upon what information we have as of now, and you'll get a sense in terms of how our budgets and our budget forecasts and projections are based off of these assumptions. So as I did mention that we will be coming back to this group in early June when we start bringing to you the preliminary budget for the 25-26 school year, the LCAP, and then along with the budget, all of those various budgetary assumptions. Between now and June, we will get another update from the governor and state. That would be the governor's May revision. So at that point in time, we'll get additional information on what we've heard so far, and we'll see where I think, we hope that the economy is in a much better place. And so we'll see whether or not what the governor is proposing in his January budget materializes. So I'll leave that at that point. So just to remind everybody in that process, as we go through this entire cycle from beginning to end, we're at that second milestone in the year where we come forward, we present to the board our fiscal picture for the year. And so I'm glad to say that we're presenting to you a budget and a second interim report that we will be able to meet our financial obligations. So along with the second interim report, when you hopefully approve this on the 13th, you'll be approving a positive certified budget that's basically states that the school district is able to meet not just its financial obligations in the current year, but also the 2 out years beyond. And that's the criteria for which a district is determined to be in good standing. Now we'll get into the nitty gritties. I'll turn this part over to Tina.
Perfect. Good evening. So the first section in our presentation tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about our overall just enrollment trends for the district. So this particular chart is giving you the past 10 years. So you can see our prior history as well as forecasting what our enrollment is looking like. So I think the trend overall, you can see prior to COVID, kind of where we were at. You can see the slope, which is during the COVID time. And then you can see this kind of evening out that is occurring. So as we keep mentioning, our decline has definitely slowed, which has been fabulous. And that is also affected by the enrollment of our TK and the addition of TK. So with declining enrollment and TK coming in, they've kind of offset each other. And so then you'll see in the future years, we start to decline again, but at a much slower slope. So these are our projections. It is important to note, we do use the demographer's report that was presented to you back in December for 2025. We do use that demographer's report, their projections, as well as our own historical and projection data that we get from the student assignment in order to come up with these kind of blended projections so that we're trying to make the best estimates possible. The next page goes into average daily attendance. And as you all know, since we've moved into basic aid, attendance isn't as primary to our focus when it comes to funding. However, we do know that attendance is critical. Kids in seats is how they learn. And so the higher their attendance, the more they're going to learn. So we know that attendance is important to our education. However, it's also important to note that we do have funding sources that are also based on our average daily attendance, even though we are in basic aid. So things like our lottery funding, our mandate block grant, they still use these measures of average daily attendance and enrollment to determine our funding levels. So we do continue to make sure that we are focusing on attendance. It is a very big focus in our district to make sure that kids are actually attending school so that they can learn. So what you see here again is that 10-year spread of our average daily attendance of our population. Again, you see that situation with COVID with that big slope, and then you can kind of see the decline. And again, now that we're basic aid, the average daily attendance does not affect our overall funding. However, it does affect other funding sources and learning. So it's critical. Then what we do on this last slide is we put the two together because it's important to recognize that these are the two factors that affect several funding sources and affect overall. So ADA and enrollment, they're basically just overlapped on this chart so that you can see the relationship between our overall enrollment and then the way in which children are actually attending school. So it's just the relationship and the trend. We use this trend to help us predict future. So as you can see, back during after COVID, our attendance rate dropped down to as low as 94%. And so we want to make sure that we're using that benchmark to start to rebuild again. Prior to COVID, we were all the way up to 98%, which is really, really high. And so we want to continue to try and strive to get, again, children in seats so that they can continue to learn. So that's a little bit about our ADA and attendance. And I'll turn it over to Chris to talk about property taxes.
Okay, thank you, Tina. So as Tina mentioned, I mean, enrollment in ADA does play a part in terms of calculating our revenues. Obviously, more so for an LCFF district, but now as a basic aid district or a community funded district, our funding is going to be primarily driven by the level of property taxes. And so maybe the only thing I would like to point out on this slide here is that even in the current year right now, we are still working off of an estimate. The latest estimate right now that we feel that we're tracking on par as far as the current year. But for our projection purposes, that's why we're talking about our projections. You've heard us talk about what we're projecting for assessed value growth for secured properties into the current year and out year. And we've used the 5% benchmark or the assumption in our projections. And that is shown on this graph here. That's what that yellow line is out from the current year out. That just assumes a 5% year over year increases in assessed value growth. So that's kind of what we're modeling. And obviously the bar graph then reflects how much total property tax revenue we're looking at. Now, I do want to share some real current information. So as I've said before, the county treasurer's office sends out updates every 2 months as far as the property taxes. And so they are in the process of rolling an estimate number forward for 25, 26. And they've informed us that our district is looking at a assessed value growth for next year, somewhere in the range of 4.61, not initially the 5% that we were building our model on. And so just for knowing what that difference in the number, a difference between a 5% and a 4.61% roughly equates to about $600,000 difference. So just with a lower assessed value could mean that our total property taxes could be about $600,000 less. So just to be aware of, and this is in a projection. And then as you've heard me say, the real number, we don't know the real number until the end of the year. So a lot can happen, a lot can change when we're talking about what's the actual amount of property taxes we will get for the 25-26 fiscal year. So that's what I want to talk about, property taxes. And then the other parts of the budget, obviously, is beyond revenue, are going to be the expenditures. So Tina can talk about some of the expenditure assumptions.
Yeah, so moving on to some of our assumptions. So at each budget interim period or at budget adoption, one of the first activities that we do is we sit down and we come up with what are the assumptions that we are going to include in this particular budget. And that includes the current year, what we're in right now, 24-25, as well as future years in the multi-year projection. So the first thing I just want to recap is our current existing year, 24-25, the year we're in right now. I just wanted to do a quick recap on the salary adjustment and how that all worked out throughout the year. So at the time we did the adopted budget, if you'll remember, we had included our 3% salary adjustment that was effective July 1, 2024. That was included in the adopted budget. But at that time, negotiations were not complete. So we did not know about the additional 2% that was going to be added and effective as of January 1st, 2025. So we did include that dollar amount. It was not yet approved. But we did include that dollar amount, but it was included in what we call our ending fund balance. So when you look at the adopted budget, you'll see the 3% included in the salaries, and then down in the ending fund balance, we had a set aside of the 2% salaries. Then when we got to first interim, we took that 2% salary savings that we had set aside in the ending fund balance, and we moved that up into the salaries into the budget. So then as of first interim, all of the salaries were then replicated and acknowledged inside of first interim. Then when we came to second interim, there were no additional changes because everything for the year for 24-25 was now included. So there are no additional changes for second interim. And then just to recap health and welfare, we learned our health and welfare that the plan year, remember health and welfare is done on a plan year. The plan year is January to December. So our new plan year that started for 2025 in January went up about 3%. So at first interim, we added that 3% so that again, 24-25 at second interim, we did not have to make any additional assumptions. Those were already all included. Then we start to move into multi-year projections for future years. So now we're talking about future years. So important note in this particular multi-year projection is that we have included a 2% salary adjustment that is subject to negotiations, which are not completed at this time, but we have included in what we are presenting to you tonight, a 2% salary increase for 25-26. There is 0% in 26-27 and 0% in 27-28. But what is included in salaries in the multi-year projection will show you 2% is included. For health and welfare, currently right now, we have added 10% for each increase in each plan year. Due to the volatility of the health market, we are really concerned. This year, we did see only a 3% increase, but prior year, we saw a 15% increase. So due to that volatility of not knowing year to year what that's going to look like, we felt comfortable with currently planning a health and welfare at a 10% increase each year. So those are included for future years. It's also important to note, I know we keep saying it, but it's important to note that all of the assumptions that we're talking about tonight, they're just at a moment in time. They will change, they'll continue to change. And the next time we come together, we'll have new numbers for you, and they will always be updated and adjusted. So then as we move on to the additional multi-year assumptions, now we're starting to get into some other personnel items. So the first thing I want to touch on is certificated attrition savings. So this is for positions that people are retiring, but we are rehiring their position just at a lower cost. So there's what we have called an attrition savings. So all these positions will be refilled, but people are retiring. We'll be bringing in new people at lower rates. So we have certificated retirement attrition savings, classified retirement attrition savings for a total retirement attrition savings. And all of these numbers that you see here, these are all projections. Obviously, we don't know who's retiring now, and we don't know who's retiring in 4 years. But we look at trends over the past 5 years. We look at any early retirement promotions that are being done. And then we try and project as best we can. So these are total retirement attrition savings that are built into our multi-year projection. Then we move into certificated changes. So as we have been talking about, one of the things that we have planned is for some reductions as well as some increases in our staffing. So first, we're going to start with certificated. So in 25-26, we have built in some reductions for certificated FTEs. We have a total of 11.1 certificated FTEs that we are looking at reductions for. Those include some reductions in middle schools, as well as our special education program in SDC and RSP. We also have some certificated increases. So these are 18 FTE teachers that we would be increasing. And those include 4 additional TK implementation teachers for the implementation of TK, as well as the addition of 14 first through third grade teachers for class size reductions. So you might say to yourself, it kind of seems like an exercise in futility if you're adding some and you're subtracting some. So the difference is a total certificated net of actually growing an additional 6.9 FTEs in certificated staff. It's important to note where the reductions are coming from. So I know later on tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about some of those reductions. And then it's important to note the increases because the district is trying to make sure that we are doing the TK implementation and the class size reduction. Then we'll move into classified. So exact same kind of layout. So with classified staff, we have reductions and increases. So on the classified reductions, we have 17.19 FTEs. And for the classified increases, we have 4 FTE for a total classified net of negative 13.19. So I'll start with the reductions first. So the reductions are various, but they are included but not limited to management, mental health therapists, IAs, SITs, BIs, SPCs, SLMTs, bus drivers, And you will see later on tonight, as we talk about some of the reductions in the resolutions that are coming before you. The important part to note about this is the resolutions that you will be looking at versus these numbers will not match. And the reason why is because these numbers that you see here are a combination of vacant positions as well as positions that are held by people. When you get to the resolutions, those will only be positions that are held by people. So if you're trying to compare numbers, you're like, wait a minute, these numbers aren't matching up. We are looking at, two different sets of numbers. So it's just important to note that. And then the classified increases include those 4 TK classes that we're adding. It includes 4 classified support staff for TK implementation on the classified side. So that's where the 4 classified FTE increases come from. So the net difference again for classified is a negative 13.19 FTE. Then the next thing that we have is vacancy savings. So anytime that you're looking at a budget, you will have at any given point in time a series of vacancies. And so one of the things that the budget we capture is what is the value of those vacancies at that moment in time until the end of the year. So if those positions remain vacant from that moment until the end of the year, what would that value be? So at first interim, you will see that we had 37.8755 FTEs that were vacant. And the value of that at that time, remember that's through October 31st. So we're talking November 1 to June 30 was 2.5 million. Now at second interim, we come back to you and we have now reassessed that number and we've filled a lot of vacancies, which is great. That's what we want. We want to fill positions. So now our vacancies are only at 14.6 with a value of 583,000. So in this budget, what we have done is we have said, we are not going potentially to fill those positions, and the value of that is $583,000. So we have captured that vacancy savings in this multi-year projection. One more to go, bear with me. So then we get into some other stuff. So that was all personnel. And now we kind of get into some of the other items. So the first one is other revenues. So this budget does have one revenue assumption that we want to draw to your attention. It is the One-Time Inflation Reduction Act, which is part of the Federal Revenue Grant Program. We are projecting to receive $8.3 million during the 25-26 school year. As we all know, this is still kind of one of those items that is on watch. We'll just say that we're on watch with it. Then we move into other expenditures. So a lot of questions have come up regarding some of our solar, et cetera. So let's dig into this. So the first one, our PG&E on-bill financing. This was for our LED project. You might remember we replaced all of our lights in all of our schools and facilities with LEDs, and all of those charges were on bill financed so that we would pay over time with the savings that we are receiving from our PG&E usage coming down for using the LEDs. So that on bill financing value that you see here is the expenditures that we will be spending each one of those years for the next it's like 30 years to pay off those on-bill financing. But that is paid for with the savings that we will see in our PG&E generation using less electricity for the LEDs. The next one is PG&E savings from solar generation. So as you guys know, we've installed all the solar, it's getting going. We do not know yet for 24-25 how much solar energy we will be generating, and therefore what the savings will be, because everything's still coming online and we're figuring that out. However, we have calculated what we believe the savings to be 25-26 and moving on. And we believe the solar generation can save us up to 50% on savings on our PG&E usage. And so we've calculated this dollar amount that you see here is 50% of our usage. So we believe that we could save upwards of 2.5 million plus a year in future years in savings from generating solar to help us with our electricity. Then I wanted to review the solar lease financing payments. So in this current plan, we have the very first payment, which is coming in 24-25 in June, the end of this year, coming out of the general fund, $168,000. Then in this plan, the solar lease financing payment is then planned to be covered by the bond fund for the next 4 years. So you'll see the dollar amounts there. We have talked about that balloon payment in 26, 27. The idea is that we will have hopefully the revenue from the Inflation Reduction Act to help us offset that balloon payment. And or we have options for refinancing if that is another thing that we want to explore. But those are the amounts of the payments for the next 4 years that we were planning on coming from the bond. I do want to note, and we will cover this a little bit later on, after those 4 years, the solar lease financing payment goes back to the general fund. So the general fund will then pick up and start paying for the solar lease program after those 4 years. So right now in the plan, only the bond is only covered in this plan in the bond fund for 4 years. And then after that, it moves back to the general fund. Next, we want to chat about the routine restricted maintenance account contribution. So just a reminder, we are required to set aside 3% of our expenditures in a routine restricted maintenance fund. Because of our bond programs and the financing that we receive from the state, it is a requirement for us to maintain those facilities that we're investing in. And so what this outlines is how we set aside that 3%. So currently right now, this year in 24-25, we are contributing 2.9 million from the general fund to cover the routine restricted maintenance account. And then we are pulling 5.9 million from the building fund to cover the rest of the RRMA. So it's split to support that 3% requirement. What I will note is the 3% requirement is about 7.8 million this year. And as you notice, the total is 8.8 million. So we are over contributing by $1 million. So one of the things that you're going to hear a little bit about is that we are looking to reduce that RRMA so that way we can get back within that 3% guideline that's mandated by the state, but also not contribute over that. So that's one of the things that we will be looking at. So you see the building fund starting in 25-26 will begin covering 100% of the RRMA in order to kind of release some of that pressure from the general fund. So that is another one of the assumptions that is made in this multi-year projection. The next slide, I'm going to use the pointer on a couple of these. So you're going to have to bear with me because I'll need my glasses. There's a lot of numbers up here, so I'm going to use the pointer. So this particular sheet is our assumption sheet. And this comes directly out of the tool that we use to build our MYP. So I just want to orient you to a few of the things I think that are going to be relevant that you'll want to look at. So the very first one, this state categorical COLA. This is what the state has identified as the COLA for the next 5 years. So when we use a COLA number for adjusting revenues, et cetera, like the lottery, mandate block grant, et cetera, this is the COLA percentage that we use. And you'll see the COLA is one of the things that we'll learn more about from the state governor's budget and kind of what his plan is for the next year and what that looks like. But that affects special education, student nutrition, as well as some of our other categorical funding. Then the second one I want to draw to your attention, sometimes this one brings up questions, are STRS and PERS rates. So STRS is pretty much set right now by the board at 19.1% at the state level, but PERS is continually growing. So you'll see that the PERS rate is going from 27 to 27.4 to 27.5 to 28.5. So this continues, PERS continues to be a real big, obviously a great benefit for employees and a tremendous cost for the district as well. So this is included in what we call our benefits. So this is the retirement benefit. We talked a little bit about property taxes. So down here in LCFF sources under local revenue, that's our property taxes. So you'll see the 5%, as Chris mentioned, we're building all of our current assumptions on that 5% growth in property taxes, but that will be one of the assumptions we will be looking at to possibly adjust and address as we look towards building the adopted budget for 25-26, seeing what the county assessor's office comes up with and how we might want to adjust that. The other one that's new that I want to share with you is LCFF sources charter in lieu of property tax transfer. So now that we are a basic aid district, We are required to support those charter schools that we have students residing in Cupertino attending. And that means a property tax transfer. So currently, right now, I did some research. We only have 2 students that reside in our district that attend charter schools that we would have to do a property tax transfer to support those students. So right now it's about $72,000 annually. So it's a small amount, but we are required to, as a basic aid district, transfer that. So I'll continue to keep an eye on that, and we'll continue to monitor that year to year to see how that may change or grow. But that is a new expenditure. A couple last ones, step and column and COLA. So a lot of times people ask, like, what is this budget? What's the step and column you've planned on? You'll see 1.5% for all years. You'll see the certificated COLA. So this is where you'll see where we included the 2% salary adjustment for 25-26. So again, pending negotiations, what's included in this multi-year agreement is currently right now 2% in 25-26. So that's where that's reflected. Then you have classified COLA and classified step and column down there as well. The last one I want to touch on falls on page 2, and that's your health and welfare. So this is where you see the health and welfare 10% assumption as it goes across all years. So that's for classified and certificated. So that's the assumption for our health and welfare. So with that, I'll turn it to Chris to talk about changes.
All right, thanks, Tina. A lot of information. We apologize. The part that I'm going to go over is some more details, but you get the sense in terms of we're just updating you on numbers. These numbers are just what's there right now. So the other part of tonight is to review with you some of the changes since we presented to you in December as far as the interim report. So this may be a little bit of a different format than what we showed you before, but this really kind of breaks it down to that detail that a lot of times we get questions from the board and the community as far as what's changed. So on this first slide here, I'm just really focusing on the far right-hand column that this shows what the differences are, the net differences between first and second interim. On this one page here, basically is just reflecting changes within the 2 unrestricted funds. This is the main unrestricted general fund and the lottery fund. So this technically represents the unrestricted dollars of our total budget. But this is just roughly the changes. And so when you look at revenues, the difference between first and second interim reduced by about $151,000 since first interim. Expenditures have been reduced by about $1.4 million since first interim. But let me show you the rest of the picture here. So this is just the unrestricted. I'm going to skip to the next page on page 16. This is then the restricted dollars.
17.
I'm sorry, 17.
Yeah, 17 is restricted.
17 is restricted dollars. So if we then focus on the far right-hand column, this column here represents the total differences for both restricted and unrestricted since first interim. So overall, total revenues since first interim have increased by about $1.5 million in comparison, and the expenditures have increased by about 1.1 million since first interim. And then, as you can see, it's broken down between savings in certificate salaries, increases in classified salaries, increases in benefits, and overall decreases in supplies and materials. So you get the sense in terms of that. These are really just the differences since we reported to you back in January. So the good thing is that I'm happy to say that there isn't a lot of big variances. We are pretty dialed in as far as our current year budget based off of what we know at this point in time. So that's the changes since first interim. Now let's kind of dive now into the multi-year. This is kind of why we're here. And let me just take a couple steps back and start back to where we started with this slide. When Tina and I were referencing the assumptions that were being used to build our budget. So we have built a budget from the revenue standpoint, right, with a property tax growth rate of about 5%. Assessed value growth. We have a projected COLA in here. We have a projected enrollment. And then on the expenditure side, one of the major assumptions that we're making at this time is that we're presuming that there may be a 2% cost of living adjustment for salaries and benefits. So we've built that into our multi-year, subject to negotiations, obviously, but we wanted to see what a 2% number would look like when you look at the bottom line. And I do want to bring to two lines to your attention. One in the middle there, it's in somewhat red color. That's the amount of deficit spending. So when you look at the current year, we're projecting the deficit spend in the current year about $31.8 million. When you take into account all of the staffing considerations that we are building into the 25-26 budget, based off of the revenue assumptions that we're making, we're projecting for 25-26 to reduce that deficit spend down from 31.8 down to 47 point, almost $8 million. So we are getting closer to having a more of a balanced budget, but we're not quite there yet, just based off of what assumptions we've made. And I do want to call out then, when you look at the reserve level at the bottom. So for the current year, 24-25, based off of what we're projecting to receive, based off of what we're projecting to spend, we're projecting to end the year with a total fund balance of about $27.4 million, of which $14.8 million represents our total combined reserves. That's both our minimum 3% reserve by Ed Code and additional board reserve that the board has asked us to set aside. So the total reserve calculates out to be about a 5.65%. That is an estimate. As I mentioned, this assumes that we're able to close the books as of today, but obviously we still have, 3 more months. And so that number will change when we actually close out our fiscal year. But then for next year purposes, for illustration, what we're projecting for 25-26, with that presumed 2% salary adjustment, it would bring our reserve down to a level of 5.83. We're not quite at that 6% or higher as we've had conversations with the board. So I just want to pull that nugget out and say that, the 2% is just a number that we placed into the budget for forecasting purposes. If that number changes, that number will then change that percentage of the reserve. Then when you look at the 5 years, we are definitely, we're not at the reserve level that I believe the wishes of the board. We are above our bare minimum reserve level of 3%. So that's something to be aware of as well, based off of these assumptions. So that's the MYP for the next 5 years. And then we're going to finish up on the fiscal stabilization plan. This was something that we shared with the board at first interim. This was a requirement that the county had asked us to provide to how we were going to address our level of deficit spending. So I think Karen's going to review that with you really quickly.
So, as Chris mentioned, after we submitted our adopted budget, the county did require a fiscal stabilization plan because of the recognition of the deficit spending. So I thought we would just take a quick minute to review overall deficit spending and how it's measured. So the first half of this chart just captures some of the big, large changes, assumptions that we made in our multi-year projection. So this takes into account changes in 25-26, like the Inflation Reduction Act. So the revenues of 8.3 million. It reflects the reduction of workforce and the decreases, but it also reflects the increase in workforce as well. So you'll see overall, the staffing changes they kind of offset each other, and the difference is only about $200,000 in 25-26. But the purpose of this document is to document the deficit spending. So as Chris mentioned on the previous MYP, on the previous page, the MYP, That deficit spend that he was looking at included restricted and unrestricted. That was everything. When the state and the county look at deficit spending, they are looking specifically at unrestricted deficit spending. So what you'll see on this chart is I've pulled out the unrestricted revenues and the unrestricted expenditures to be able to look at just unrestricted spending. And you'll see that our unrestricted spending deficit spending goes from about 16 million. It gets down to almost 100,000. It goes back up to about 4 million, and then it comes back down to 200,000. But you will see that we are still deficit spending in each of the years. So the overall goal as a district is obviously not to deficit spend. That's the overall goal. So currently right now, we are deficit spending with the adjustments that we made in 25-26. We do bring it into an amount that is acceptable by the county and the state, even though they do not want to see deficit spending, it is acceptable. Then it drops back down a little bit to 26-27, and then comes back into the acceptable range for 27-28. So with this plan, we are well on our way to bringing down our deficit spending. But what we want to mention is the changes that you're about ready to look at, the reductions in workforce. This plan is contingent on those reductions, because if we are unable to do those reductions, then that changes this plan, and then the deficit spending then would rise back up again. So I just wanted to tie those two together and how they will affect one another in the event that that decision is made. So that's where those are reflected. The last section is our fund balance. And as Chris just mentioned, he talked about our district reserve. One of the things as a basic aid district is the recommendation by the county and the state is that a basic aid district have at least 15% of their general fund expenditures in their reserve. And the reason why this is critical, it's prudent for us to maintain a high bond rating. It's important to protect the district from effects of fluctuations in our property tax revenues, which we've been talking about. It really makes us very vulnerable. And I just want to mention that a 15% reserve would be equivalent to about $39 million, which we are nowhere near close to. And so what we are trying to do is slowly start building in that direction. And that's what this plan presents to you, is that continued slow build to start rebuilding those reserves and be able to get us in a place that as a basic aid, we do feel like we are a little bit protected from some of those fluctuations. And you can see the current reserve levels as they are listed here. So with that, we'll pause, I think, for questions.
All right, thank you, Chris and Tina, for another comprehensive update. Let's see, I'll bring it back to the board for questions. Anybody would like to go first? Long, did you want to? Okay, Long, thank you.
Okay, so how do we
Let's say clarifying questions. Let's maybe limit to 3 for now, and we can go multiple rounds.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And if you just happen to have the slide that you want us to reference to, if you can say that number, then I believe Tina has the clicker and we can jump it back on.
Yeah, let's go to page 8. So yeah, how much do we get from the property tax, say per $1,000 assessed value? Do you have any?
Let's see, I don't have that on me here. You're asking how much revenue we're generating based off the assessed value.
Yeah, but say normalized, say if for every $1,000 assessed value, how much do we get?
Can I borrow your book?
Mhm.
The total property tax revenues. $157 million is the
Mhm.
total property taxes
Okay.
revenue
For which year?
for the current year. This is for the
For the
current year.
current year, so 24, 25.
But to connect that to the assessed value is the question.
Yeah.
how much, this is how much of our revenue we're receiving for the assessed value, and I think we're about 60 million assessed value.
Okay,
Or I'm sorry, 60 billion.
60 billion is our assessed value,
okay,
and we receive about 157 million.
okay, 100, how much? 65?
157.
Okay.
157 million revenue.
Okay. And say, okay, thank you. For next page, page 9. I see say the health and welfare increase is 10%, while our projected revenue increase is 5%. So it's basically outgrowing our revenue. Will it become an issue eventually?
So the 10% increase is the total cost of what the health and welfare cost is to the district, not the total increase of what our revenue is. So maybe a simple would be as if we're paying 1 million in health and welfare benefit, we're expecting that to go up 10% the following year, another 10%. It's much more than 100,000, but
Okay.
so it's just the 10% increase based on what our health and welfare cost is.
Okay, so it's a total percent instead of it's not because everything else is adjustment, and this one is a total
So
percent.
maybe Stacy has, it's not a 10% total increase to the budget. It's a 10% increase to the premium cost of the health benefits. So health benefits isn't it a one, it's not a 1-for-1 as far as the total budget goes. So it's a 10% increase in the premium cost, but it doesn't represent 10% of the budget. So it's not a total increase in the budget of 10%.
Okay, so it's still 10% increase of itself.
In the cost.
The premium cost.
Yeah, premium cost. Yeah, because last time when we do board advance, I think it doubled in 2 years or something. Okay, and it seems like it's a faster growing area.
Yeah. I think we all are nervous about what healthcare as it's volatile and what the increases are. I know that our health and welfare committee works very hard with our consultants to try to maintain those costs going down. But, I do think we need to plan to see some of those go up. All those items that were free during COVID weren't really free.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I have another question. Say, what is restricted and unrestricted funds?
So our total general fund, right? Our total general fund is made up of unrestricted dollars and restricted dollars. Unrestricted by definition are funds that can be used or designated for any purpose that the board sees fit. Funds that are considered restricted, that's by definition, the state says these funds are restricted. It implies that those funds have restrictions or limitations, or I use the word strings attached. So those funds have specific regulations as far as how you may spend them. So it means that you just can't spend unrestricted dollars on anything we would like to use it for. So that's the main difference. So our budget is made up of both restricted dollars and mainly unrestricted dollars.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. That's my 3 questions.
All right, thank you. Okay, Satish.
Yeah. Thank you. This is a lot actually. So I made a lot of notes, but let me see here what I can talk about. I can ask a question about ADA. So this ADA, what's the percentage of our total revenue based on ADA? I know that, like you said, certain items are dependent on ADA versus since we are in the basic aid, most of the things are not. What could be the total percentage approximately, just to get a feel?
Things that are affected would be like student nutrition.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I pulled a number for the board for that information, this because it had come up before. I'm just trying to remember what I shared with the board. I know I put in the Friday letter. So as far as the percentage of those funds, it's as Tina mentioned, it's mainly lottery, mandated block grant.
Sped and nutrition services.
I mean, it's not more than 10%.
It's more,
I don't
okay.
think it's more than 10% of our budget that's tied to ADA.
Yes, it's a small one.
And because why is it a conservative projection of this area? Because roughly, if I see that graph, it's about 500 lower than the actual enrollment, 500 numbers each, the 500 students per year. If you give that slide number 7, if you see it, the difference is it's roughly about 500 between the actual ADA
Mhm.
projection versus the enrollment.
Yeah,
this
so I
is-
mean, that's the attendance rate of the district. when you
So
look
this
at it.
is how it has been, or because it's more or less same 500-ish. That is every year we will have 500 students absent, or the year or 10 months or whatever. Is it that, or how did
I
this
mean, I
number
wouldn't
come?
necessarily say it's 500 every year, but when you look at our attendance rate is it 95%?
We're, yeah, 96-ish. We came in for 23-24. We came in at 97%. This year, we're looking at right now at about 96%. That's the attendance rate.
So in any given year, with an attendance rate of 96-97%, that would be the difference, the delta, the difference between enrollment and what we would be receiving were we funded off of ADA. And I think Stacy mentioned, or Tina mentioned, prior to COVID, in our best years, we had a great attendance rate of like 98%. That's very high for most school districts.
So the excused absence are considered as still an ADA issue, or it is considered as it'll normalize.
So they would still affect, even if they're excused absences, that would still affect the overall rate of attendance.
Okay, so the next one I'll switch to slide 12 on this slide 12. Oh, yeah, slide 12. So this overall solar stuff, right? A little bit. I think this is one of the topics which I don't know whether we had ever a closure on that. Is it still a bond money versus the? I thought that the overall solar we had a different scheme how we were planning to operate, because when it was projected, it is a different way of funding it or taking a loan or whatever you call. Maybe Bank of America or something that time came up, and then every year you will be paying so much, and then net effect like over a period of time it will be we will start saving a lot, right? That's what it is. And here, if I see that there are roughly about like a 10 million is coming from kind of a bond fund in between 26, 27, then 2.2 and so on. So is it like this decision was taken already, or is it a proposal again about this moving some money from the bond to this?
This is an assumption at this point in time.
Okay.
That assumption can change, as we shared with the board last time. And so to go back to what you're saying, initially, when we brought before to you the plan to finance the solar, we borrowed the money, and the money was going to be paid back from the general fund savings of not having to pay electricity through PG&E. All those savings were already being budgeted in the general fund. They were just going to go and pay back the loan. So that assumption has always been in there. So what's different now is that we're bringing a recommendation for a period of 4 years to relieve the general fund of that annual loan payment to address our deficit spend. But then after 4 years, we would put that obligation back to the general fund. So the bond fund is, in this case, just giving us a bridge of 4 years to cover those annual payments. I mean, should the board want us to go in a different direction, it just means that those expenditures would all go back to the general fund, and then it would come out of the bottom line. That's all.
Okay, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but I think some point of time can we discuss this about this a little bit more in detail about how we are proposing on this bond thing, not bond, how we are proposing on this this solar stuff, and like now if I see roughly it's about 20 million or so like taking from the bond to offset this. So would like to see, I think I would like to hear from everybody else what's because bond we had. I know that we are in trouble in terms of overall money perspective, but we have to see is there any better way or things like that on that because bond initial intention of bond was not that, but now since roughly about 20 million goes out of the bond for towards this, would like to see a plan on solar overall.
We can certainly bring it back for further discussion. And again, this is one of the assumptions that we're building in at this time. The other that we will potentially be bringing back at a future date is we may have the opportunity to refinance the solar project already. So there could be some additional savings where we may not have to use this out of the bond. So again, we use this to balance the budget as a possibility for 4 years. But I think as Chris and Tina said, these are assumptions. We will continue to revisit them and they could look different when we
Yeah,
bring
so
back
so basically, if you don't do this, what happens to the general price? That's also right, like because this is roughly about 20 million we are taking. If you're not using that, what happens to the general fund or how is our multi-year and things like that?
Sure.
Probably. I'll wait for me.
All right, thank you. Who would like to go first on the time?
Oh, I can.
If you're not ready.
I have lots of questions. So
For it.
go ahead.
Before- oh,
You go ahead. Maybe you'll eliminate some of my questions.
My, so I also had a lot of questions on slide 12. I was having a little bit of trouble following because some of these are savings and some of these are expenses, right? Is that when I'm looking down the list of,
Yes.
okay. So what is there like a bottom line takeaway for this slide? Like, is
No,
there-
yeah, this was built just to capture individual assumptions that were made around specific topics. This wasn't intended to summarize like a dollar amount or
I
a
see, okay.
overall savings or what have you. This is really just to capture a few individual assumptions in categories.
Okay, okay. All right, thank you. That helps me understand that a little bit. I had similar questions to Satish about the 10 million, the balloon payment, and where kind of what I understand the 4 years of taking a break from the general fund and moving it to the bond. The 2.7 and then the 10 and then 2.2, 2.3, just wondering about the jump there.
Yeah, so the jump was actually what the financing was. So when we entered the agreement with Bank of America, this was how the financing was set up. And it was mainly to take into account that $8.3 million from the Inflation Reduction.
Right? Okay,
So that it was intended to be timing so that year that we got these 8 million, it would go down and pay a larger amount of the debt service.
okay. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, is that supposed to be tied to energy, or is that like,
That's the federal funding that we would be eligible to receive by participating in the solar and the EV charging.
I see.
stations.
So we're receiving it because of the solar, so
Correct,
then it's the transferring it. Okay, thank you. That helps me understand that. And then the so the RMA with the 3% requirement, and we're over contributing by 1.1 this year. Is that,
Correct.
Yes.
and why is that?
So as Tina mentioned, our minimum requirement to set aside is 3% of the total.
Uh-huh.
When you look at our routine repair maintenance program, so this is the budget that more or less helps us maintain all of our facilities.
Mhm.
And so this covers all of our maintenance things. A large percentage of our budget is tied to personnel costs. And then obviously the cost of maintaining our facilities goes up every year. And so we've reached a point right now where, because of the condition of our facilities, we're needing to spend in excess of the minimum amount we have to set aside. I mean, it varies from district to district, but it's been my experience in my past that all those districts that I've been in, we've managed to stay within that 3%, but things of the cost of labor, the cost of staffing has gone up over time, inflation, and it just puts a further restriction, or at least puts a further limit on maintaining a facility. So it just reached a point where, since a larger percentage of that budget is personnel costs, as personnel costs go up, it's going to require us to provide a contribution. It's similar to what we're dealing with special education.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. And then I guess the final question is, as we're looking at the multi-year, I feel like we had this conversation in December when we were looking at first interim, and we had the same conversation about, well, we projected it at 5% growth, or 5%, 5% property tax growth, as well as and then it was so much lower. So I guess my question is, why are we still using the 5% in these calculations?
Well, as I mentioned, the latest we got was just yesterday. We were estimating still 5%, and it's tracking less than 5%. So we will revise this projection when we come back with when we do the adopted budget too.
So the role growth is also still continuing to grow. So at first interim, the role growth for 25-26 was projected only at 4%. So between that time and now, it's actually grown 0.6%. So we're up to 4.6% in the projection. So the projection is still continuing to grow. So the role growth could technically still grow to 5% before they actually roll it at the beginning of 25-26. So
I'm sorry, role growth means what?
The assessed value. So what they do is they take all of the assessed value of all the homes, and then what they're going to do is then roll that into 25-26. So right now during 24-25, that's the assessed roll. And then they're going to roll that into the next year. And then that's going to be the assessed value for 25-26. So right now, as they're preparing that roll, they're doing all the adjustments. There's people, buying homes, selling homes. So there's all these things that are happening. So that roll growth is actually still continuing to grow. So there's still a possibility that between now and the end of the year, that roll could grow to 5%. I've been trying to see, watch it, keep an eye on it. It's grown about 0.6% since we came to you with first interim. So there is a possibility it could hit 5%. 6% is definitely way too aggressive. So that's why we came down to 5%. But 5% is still right now a very realistic possibility. However, if 2 months go by and we get another update and we're still sitting at 4.6%, then by all means, we probably need to reevaluate at adopted budget what we want to plan for our revenue. But I think it's still in the realm of possibility, because the role growth is still growing. It's not done.
So from a planning point of view, is it still the most, I don't know if the word is accurate or efficient, or to continue using that number? Or should we try to underestimate?
So maybe if we use the word, what's the most conservative position we would take? Would we take a position at 6%? No. We're currently taking a position of 5%, but maybe even more conservative, would we want to take a position of, say, 4%? I mean, we can run all those three scenarios and do our modeling off of that. And so the question might be is if the board comes back and say that, we should be even more conservative than 5%, then we would just bring it down, a couple basis points. So that, I think, is a good discussion on how the board is. Do we want to be even more conservative than what we're just basing on? And we're just kind of ebbing and flowing as far as what the county is advising us. So
And
I
I do think it's one of the challenges of that first year of basic aid, a part of it is looking at historical trends and advice from the county of what we use. So, I think as Tina mentioned, we'll closely monitor here in these next couple of months because it has increased. There is the potential, but we would also know as we're building out the next budget we're bringing forward, whether we need to reduce that down or continue.
Remember what Chris said too at the beginning. The value of changing it from 5% down to 4.61% is $600,000. So we're not, I mean, we're not talking about millions and millions of dollars. We're talking about $600,000. So that's the difference between 5 to 4.61. If you went with 4.61,
Yeah.
it's really only a change of $600,000. So I think that's another way of looking at it is what's the value of how much money are we talking about? And then you can decide how conservative or aggressive you want to be.
Thank you. Those are my three for now.
Okay, thanks. Ayla, please go ahead.
Okay, can we go up to, I'm gonna try to go under as well. Can we go to slide 7, please? Okay, so it's on there. My question is, the ADA funded. I thought we're going to basic aid, or is this? I'm a little confused.
So we do still receive some funding
Okay.
under the ADA. So the lottery,
Mandate block grant.
mandated block grant,
Special
some of the
education.
nutrition services. So there are some of those that still will receive based on there. So it's not as important for funding wise, but it certainly is important for student learning.
Okay, so, and they're based on actual numbers, not our estimated numbers. Is that why there's a difference between projected and funded, like the actual number of students?
So actually, back during COVID, CDE enacted the 3-year average rule
Right.
because during COVID, 1 year's worth of attendance dropped so significantly that districts were really affected. So
Mhm.
they implemented the funding rate is the average of the previous 3 years. They look at a couple of different things. What's your current, what would be your funding level at that? What would be your funding level at 3 years? And then they take whatever's the highest. So that what we put here is basically how CDE evaluates it and what would be the funding rate that they would fund us at based on that criteria. So the actual or projected ADA is what's actually happening. And then CDE does their calculation. And then that's what we actually get funded at using those formulas.
Can we get a list of the funding that relies on ADA? And these are state funded, right?
Correct.
Okay. I know you gave some examples. I was just wondering the whole list. Okay, moving on. Thank you for explaining. To slide 10. Is it 10? Yes. Okay. I like seeing the retirement incentive and putting that in perspective, which makes me think, have we established a retirement incentive? Yes.
So these assumptions do not assume any retirement incentive. So these are
Okay.
just based on attrition, our average, what we
Historic.
see every year, and then the savings for that. So this is not inclusive of the retirement incentive program that we're hopefully potentially going to bring forward after we have more discussion with our union
Okay,
presidents.
so it's based on historical data then?
It is.
Okay. Clarification on the bottom part where I really like how you listed out where these reductions are coming from and where the increases are coming from. And they said certificate increases in the TK implementation. Does that mean, and I see that also in slide 11, that there are TK positions that are certificated and classified?
Correct. So as we're
Okay.
expanding into that full implementation, when we hire the TK, we're hiring the teacher and then the IA that goes along with them.
I think that was my third question.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go around. I'm sure
Yeah,
there are
yeah,
more
of
than three.
course.
Thank you. All right, my three, slide 12, please, the multi-year. I do appreciate you putting all the variables in the model in one place. That's really helpful. So the second line there, under expenditures, the PG&E savings, is that a minus to our fund or a plus to our fund? I'm a little bit, if you could kind of explain that.
Sure. So the reference to the PG&E savings from the solar generation, this would be a reduction in terms of what we were projecting to spend just on electricity bills.
Reduction in our expenditure.
Reduction expenditure. So we're using a conservative number of about 50%.
Okay,
Angie's built us a system that should be generating and covering at about 75% of our spend down. But since we're in the initial years, we're just being very conservative. So this is roughly about 50% of what we normally spend each year on electricity.
So to follow the same convention as, say, the staff devices, maybe we could put a minus sign. Okay, great, thank you. And then second question, jumping onto slide 16, where we're looking at the deltas between the first and the second interim, and there are a couple of items there that are, you know, the delta is more than $1 million on the right. I wonder if you could just speak a bit to, I think there are 3 of them, just briefly. What are the drivers for that?
You bet, absolutely. So the first 2 are contributions. So special education and routine restricted maintenance. The general fund helps contribute to cover the cost of those items. So when the cost of those items goes up, the contribution then increases. So as staffing costs go up, as expenditures go up, then that increases our contribution. So for those particular 2, 1.063 million and 1.046 million, that's basically overall the increase in costs, which means then our overall contribution then increases.
Okay.
We talked a little bit at first interim of some of those costs that are going up. We've talked about payroll, et cetera. But then we've also talked about in special education, some of the services such as NPS, et cetera, have gone up significantly. So that would be included in that as well. The other one down under, let's see, books and supplies, overall that $1 million. So Chris was mentioning the differences between restricted and unrestricted. So in unrestricted, you'll notice that books and supplies has actually come down considerably. We've done a lot of really diligent savings, and we've really been trying to really kind of prune the trees. However, what you'll notice in unrestricted in our Fund 8, those are our special fund, but special categorical programs that are specially funded. So when your revenue goes up, your expenditures go up. So you'll see a correlation between the revenue going up in Fund 8 as well as the expenditures going up in Fund 8. So if you look at page 17, and if you look at the overall revenues went up about 2.8 million in the restricted fund, and then overall the expenditures went up 2.5 million. That's that direct correlation of revenues coming in and then those expenditures that are related to that going back out again.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's a
No
great
problem.
explanation. My third question is last Thursday, on the sort of when we talked about this, there was a request to look at potential reductions in certificated management. I know it's only been 3 or 4 days, but I'm wondering, is that something that we might see for when I know the second interim, the next one would be the budget for 25-26. Just thinking, just do we have a sense of what that timeframe might be, or if that's even feasible?
So timeline wise, we would be under that March 15th deadline. So you wouldn't see any coming forward as layoffs. Where will potentially continue to monitor is as we move forward with the retirement incentive, as we look at positions as people leave them, whether we refill them. So those will be those ongoing that will continue throughout the entire rest of this year and into next year. We'll just be carefully monitoring any of those positions. So because of that March 15th deadline and timeframe, you won't see us coming back with another resolution for certificated management layoffs at this point, but definitely on our radar, and we'll be looking at that as we move forward.
All right, thank you. All right, so those are my 3. So let's go around again. If you have any, so it's questions. Let's do another round of questions, and we'll maybe hear public comments, and then we can deliberate. So
Okay, sure. Say on page 13. Say everything else is in percentage, but why say lottery is in a dollar amount?
Yeah, so the way the funding is determined for those items is on a per student dollar amount. So when they categorize those, they look at our average daily attendance, they look at our enrollment, and then it's calculated by a per student dollar amount. So those are the amounts that we're going to receive per student. So that's why those are in dollar amounts.
Okay. So that means every student can receive 191, right?
We receive $191 per student or per ADA.
88.
These are those ADA numbers.
Okay, that's why. Okay, that's why 88. Okay, I see. Thank you. And say on page 16. Are those projected revenue or expense? Those are all projected to the entire year, right? It's not up to right now.
Correct. These are
Mhm.
these are projections for the year based off of what we know now.
Okay, I see. Yeah, again, say, for our lease revenue, like, the lease of, Regnard and where does that revenue go?
So the revenue from all of our closed school sites actually don't show up here directly into the general fund. It's in our building.
Okay, in the building fund. Okay, building fund is not a part of the revenue?
It's listed, actually, I'll refer to the green book. There's a section here that talks about all of the funds.
Mhm.
So beyond the general fund, there are the building fund, there's the bond fund, there's Nicole's program, is a nutrition services fund. So on page, where's the other things?
Maybe while Chris is looking for that too, is one of it, as we increase our lease revenues and we're able to put that into the building fund, it releases some of the money that we were having to put in the building fund back into our general fund. And so as we can continue to increase those lease revenues, it does help us offset all of our funds as well.
Okay, so for the building fund, do we use the building fund just for building new structure or?
Capital
what does it-
improvements.
Okay, capital expense.
So
okay.
for your question, Long, on
Mhm.
page 18 of the green book. This is the similar formatted, but this covers all those additional funds outside of the district's general fund. So there are several columns when you get to page 18.
Okay, thank you.
So let me orient what's on here. The first column is the cafeteria program. So this is Nicole's program. The next column is the building fund. So the building fund here, it says Fund 21 represents all of our revenue and expenditures tied to our buildings, our lease facilities. And then we have other funds here between developer fees. And then Cooper-Doodle is the enterprise funds, Fund 63.
Which page are you turning?
This is on page 18 of the booklet.
Okay, thank you.
This one?
Yeah, did I ask? Oh, maybe did I-
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I have one more. So, on, a special, it's still on page, let me see. Page 17. So, our, special ed, we basically spend more than 20% on special ed, and our state and federal fund cannot cover, and we need to have more than 34 million transfer from the contributed from the general fund, right? Okay, right, thank you.
Thanks, Long. Satish.
Yeah, I have two questions. And one is this one-time Inflation Reduction Act, right? So federal revenue grant. So this is an 8.3 million. Is it a guaranteed one, or it's a assumption what you're making because of these changes and things, so that you're putting it for 25, 26?
Loaded question. I mean, personally speaking, obviously, I feel that there is some risks because of the changes with the current administration. We are going forward, assuming we get what we're entitled to receive. We're going through the motions of applying for funding. It's unfortunate right now that we can't apply for all the sites yet because we haven't completed all the sites. So the sites that have completed as of today, we're able to apply for the funding there. And we're hopeful that by the time we're done with the rest of the projects, there isn't any presidential action to possibly, pull it back. I mean, that's what we've been hearing, is that there is the talk about, the thought that Congress could pull it back. We don't think that by an executive order, the Inflation Reduction Act can go away. It would have to probably be at the will of the entire Congress. So imagine then the politicalness of, well, if there's enough people, advocating for it, there's the possibility it could take a while to to get figured out. So we're hoping just to get our project done, get our applications in the soonest amount of time, and take our chances, and hopefully we'll be funded at the end of the day.
There is a restriction on when we can apply for the funds, so the project has to be completed before we can apply for the funds. So as we're finishing the projects and they're being signed off by PG&E, then we can apply for them. But because we still have this phase 3, we're not able to apply for that full amount at this point. As soon as they're completed, hopefully by this summer, signed off, then we will apply for the remainder.
So there is a risk around that. Okay. The second one is this charter school 72,000, right? So that's interesting. I was not aware of this. So for 2 students, we are from our district, we are giving 72,000. What is that math? Is it something? Because I calculated actually, if 72,000 for students means 13,000 students here, we should be doing some 9 billion or something. Our total, it's or 900 million maybe, or 9 billion. One of the zeros I could not. So what is it? What is that from?
Yeah, so
explain?
CDE calculates the property tax transfer in lieu. And they use the average amount of property taxes per unit of average daily attendance. So they do take into account the charter school's average daily attendance when they're calculating it. I can get you more information about the calculation. I'm pretty sure it was just 2 students, but I'll go back and double check. But basically it's a calculation that's done by CDE. So we could do in a Friday memo more information about the calculation, and I can give you more information on the students in the charter school as well.
So we don't have any control on that, right?
No.
So,
No.
okay.
It's a requirement under a basic aid district.
So so in a way, if this 2 becomes 20 tomorrow, I think that itself will be a big money. We'll have to keep it $500,000 aside. Right?
Yeah, the 1 year back in 22, 23, when we went basic aid for just 1 year, it was about 150,000, I want to say. So you're absolutely right. If the number of students grows, that the students are residing in our district and attending a charter school, that number could potentially grow. And as a basic aid district, that would be something we would want to, keep an eye on.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So
2 students in our entire district going to charter school, that's amazing.
I have to be honest, I actually was a little bit
That's amazing.
surprised when I looked it up. I was actually surprised.
Yeah, so good job us. Really, like that's I can't even, that's so astounding to me. My main question is regarding the multi-year. So I guess slide 20. So help me understand, like, I'm not used to seeing a chart where the reserve total is less than 6%. So are you showing this to us because you're saying this is where it's going to go if we continue heading in this direction? Because we can't submit it this way, right? Because it's not following our own policies then.
So let me start, and I know Stacy may want to add. So for the purposes of today, we're showing you a version of the multi-year projection. If we build in an assumption of a 2% raise, what that does then to the bottom line. So obviously, if we didn't assume the 2% raise, the reserve level would be higher than what we're showing you on this piece, on this form here. It would be more than the 5.83. It'd be closer to 6. I don't know how much over 6, but we would be closer to 6,
7%.
maybe more like 7%. So if we make that an assumption, then this is kind of what we're showing the reserve level to be. And as I mentioned, if we elect later to take that assumption out, then we just adjust the bottom line, we adjust the reserve, because it's all relative to the amount of additional expenditures that we add to the budget. So as we add more expenditures to the budget, then the fund balance gets smaller, the reserve balance gets smaller, and vice versa. As we reduce expenditures, then the fund balance goes up and the reserve balance goes up.
So and I think I would just add on to that, this is based on a picture in time as of today. If nothing changes moving forward, this would be what our budget would continue to be. But it also gives us that time and sense, one, I think just acknowledging that each year when we bring in our multi-year budget for us, one of the concerns is we do hear from our employees is that have you not even considered about that salary increase? And I think that has always been, one of the important things as a board and as a district we want to recognize. And so although it may not seem like a large salary, it does have to be negotiated, but at least to consider that so that as we move forward, it's already built in versus coming back in June or July and saying, okay, now we've negotiated a salary and having to make these cuts. It gives us the time moving forward because for one, we know these numbers are going to change by May and June when we bring back the budget. We are likely to have some carryover that may offset that. There's a lot of unknowns of what the governor is going to come forward, whether there is going to be any one-time monies. We don't know what the property tax is. We don't know what some of our retirement incentives are, what some of those savings are. Are we going to have some attrition that we don't fill positions or don't need to? So there's so many moving factors. So this is just a snapshot right now, based on the budget that we know, this is what it would potentially look like. It meets the requirement of having the 3%. So our budget is a positive budget. We're not concerned with that.
Okay. So for the purposes of submitting this to the county, right? This is what it would look like with this lower amount,
Correct.
with that salary increase assumption in there.
Yes.
And that would be, and even though it's all deficit spending in this chart, the county would accept it because it's just second interim. It's not.
I would say that the county is accepting it because we have a fiscal stabilization plan
Okay,
to address the deficit in the multi-year.
okay. Okay. And then we know that when it comes back next time, it'll be after the May revise, there'll be new numbers. We don't know what the governor's gonna do. We don't know what, but then with basic aid, we don't get our property tax info till October, right?
We will at that time be working off of a projection,
Okay,
then for 25, 26.
okay. Okay,
Good, right, Ava,
Okay.
please go ahead.
All right, sorry, trying to go back. Oh, let's go to slide 12. My question is, why are we assuming the bond / Measure Z money to cover the solar lease financing payment since I remember it was brought up at a board meeting and it wasn't quite discussed, like we didn't take any action on that because there was some paperwork that was brought up, I think by you, Chris, right?
So to re-clarify the question, the subject of using Measure Z to make any payments towards the solar was first brought up as part of the assumption and the recommendation at first interim. At that time, as you recall, we were making the assumption that the entire lease, the entire solar lease was to be paid off by Measure Z, but we have adjusted that assumption, taking the consideration from what we heard from the board last time. And so we brought before you a different assumption that we would use Measure Z to just cover 4 years of those annual payments. And so again, that's this assumption here. If the board wants us to consider a different assumption, we could certainly make a different assumption as far as whether or not Measure Z is used for any payback of any of the debt related to the solar. But the plan here to show our reserve and meeting our requirements and dealing with this deficit was built upon an assumption that we would use Measure Z for 4 years to help cover that cost. And so we can make a different, I mean, we can entertain a different assumption where Measure Z isn't funding any portion of it, but just understand that we would be adding that cost then back to the general fund, and then we would be talking about that deficit spend amount would be more than what we're projecting here.
So this year, none of the money is being used for it. However, in your projection, you're assuming that part of it would be used. Part of the Measure Z / bond money
In
would
this
be
set of
used
assumptions,
for the solar lease financing
correct, in this set of assumptions.
in these assumptions. Okay. And then clarifying question still on slide 12. The RMA requirement is 3% per year, and it stays 3% of our budget.
General fund expenditures,
Oh, so it's 3% of the general fund expenditures.
and it is an annual amount that must be set aside.
In it, like every year additional to.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so 3% general expenditures every year additional, right? Okay. Thank you. And then, that is a comment. We're going to slide 17. I had some questions, and thank you, Jerry, for answering about the expenditures and what the differences are. Let's see. Actually, slide 22, sorry. Looking at the wrong numbers. Y'all were talking about something about 15% reserve because we're a basic A. Is there an ed code I'm not aware of for the 15% recommendation? Can you help me understand where that recommendation is coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. So CDE, I found some frequently asked questions that they put together when a district is transitioning to basic aid. And one of the frequently asked questions, I'm happy to share this information with you, was, what's the minimum amount a district our size would want to set aside as a basic aid district in order to protect us from those economic uncertainties and to continue to, maintain a high bond rating and really protect the district. And so that the recommendation, it's not like a requirement or anything like that, but the recommendation for California basic aid school districts, that their recommendation is not less than 15%.
And I'll add, last year, during one of our board discussions, when we were talking about the shift into basic aid and the ideal reserve, one of the asks for the board was what was typically our surrounding districts. And when we did the reach out to what our surrounding districts were that are in basic aid, it was anywhere from 10% to 30% reserves that they maintained.
Another way to look at it is sometimes they say you should have at least 3 months cash on hand. So 3 months cash on hand for us of our expenditures is over $60 million. So it just depends on what way you want to look at it, how you want to protect the district from those volatile fluctuations that can occur.
So you probably know this better than I do, Tina. $60 million is what percentage of our
Oh, you know what? I didn't run that one actually. 15% was about 39 million. So 30% would be about 80.
No, I mean,
Oh, sorry.
you're saying 3 months cash is
Oh,
over
60 million.
60 million.
Yes.
What is that in terms of percentage?
I would have to run it. It's probably like 22%. I don't have the math off the top of my
Okay.
head, sorry.
All right. And then, The increased cost going to slide 16, going back to 16, sorry. When we have increased costs of SPED and RMA costs and NPS services, does that include our settlements? Like when we go into closed session and we settle things that are related to special education?
All that is included in there.
And
The
so
supplements are
those
included.
come out of our general fund.
They do. Okay. And that the contribution then covers that.
That's the questions I have for now. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Let's hear yours.
I just have one. It's really just the process behind the stabilization plan. I know we submit this along with second interim. And so let's say come July, we're ready to submit the budget. Let's say if we do show deficit spending above that level, do we submit yet another stabilization plan? And do they ever check to see if you did what you said you were going to do, or do they just kind of want to see you have one? It's okay. I'm just asking how the system works, not asking what you're doing.
Well, I mean, the county provides guidance as far as what they will accept from us and what they require from us to approve
Mhm.
the report or the budget. So just like with the annual reports, the county will weigh in on what we submit to them.
Mhm.
And at that point in time, if there's additional information that they need from us, they will ask us
Okay.
before approving. So they will always give us a contingent approval if they want us to provide further information. But I would suspect that right now, unless we didn't have a plan going forward, they would be expecting us to have more of a formal plan
Okay.
when we submit our adopted budget.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you. That helps. All right. Let's just check another round for questions, folks.
Yes, I have
Please.
another one. So thank you, Eva, for asking for the bond in the and the solar. And so that was my question as well. Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay, and yeah, I have another one. Say for our layoff decisions, will that already come into this multi-year planning? Have you already assumed it will happen, or what are they prepared?
So I believe the question is, have we made any assumptions in the multi-year around layoffs? I think as we had said that we are making an assumption right now that there are some reductions in FTEs. That number and the final number and all that will be dependent upon what the board approves, but our assumptions are based upon some reductions. It could be a different number by the time we actually take action on any of the reductions. So, but right now it's assumed in our multi-year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Satish,
I don't have any questions. I'll wait for my
comments.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Ava, any other questions?
One more question, slide 22. How do vacancies count? Or, I mean, it's kind of like the chicken or the egg kind of questions, like you have a position, are you counting that towards that, or because it's vacant and we haven't charged that or like paid anyone out for that? How is that counted in the budget when you're doing these assumptions?
So let me try to do that. Under most normal situations where we have a position that's been budgeted,
Okay,
if that position is vacant the entire year, we typically don't recognize the savings of that vacant position until the end of the year. But every year, we start the year with an assumption that we fill that position, so we keep budgeting for that position with the intent on filling it. But what we've tried to make an assumption now in our current budget was that we have some amount of vacancies right now, and we're projecting that we're going to have those savings at the end of June. So it's like taking credit for the savings today for the vacant positions that we know we won't fill between now and June 30th. So So that's kind of what we're doing in our fiscal stabilization plan. We're making an assumption that there are certain vacancies that we're just gonna not fill those positions and take the credit from those non-fill positions now versus waiting until we close the books.
I have a follow-up with that one. I guess at what point do we say, I mean, do we wait until the end of the year and say, hey, we never filled it because we never used it? Or is there something that determines like, oh, we don't need that position for the rest of the year and we're sure of that, and that we take that credit then?
Yeah, so there's an ongoing process that we do in conjunction with HR, where at first interim and at second interim, we are reviewing all vacancies and assessing if we believe that those are positions that would need to be continued to attempt to be filled, or if there are any positions that we believe do not need to be filled. So that's an ongoing assessment that we do at every interim, first interim and again at second interim. And that's a collaboration that HR does with all of the departments. So they review the vacancies, and then they go out and they meet with all the departments and figure out, okay, do we still need all these vacancies? Are any of these things that we can close? So that is an ongoing exercise that does happen throughout the year.
So there are, so what I'm hearing you're saying, make sure I understand that there are positions that do close within the year, and there are some positions like Chris was saying that they close at the end of the year,
Yeah.
fiscal year.
Yeah, so we could potentially have a vacancy that we look at the vacancy and the department says, yes, we need to continue to try and fill that position. It could be a sped position is a great example, because there are some very critical sped positions that we really need to fill. So we're going to keep that position open. We want to continue to fill it. So it remains in the budget and the dollars remain in the budget. And then at the end of the year, we never fill that position. So at the end of the year, then you've got a credit back of all those savings that we were setting aside for that position because it's never been filled. Then you have the opposite, where you might have a position that you're evaluating where maybe like a noontime aide, thank you, noontime supervisor or noontime aide. We had, we might be evaluating a school and the school says, you know what, we have enough noontime aides. We've only got 3 months left in the year. The chances of filling that position are probably pretty small. We don't believe we're going to need that between now and the end of the year. So in that case, because of that evaluation, we would remove those savings from the budget so we could take credit for that now, because we don't anticipate filling that position between now and the end of the year. So it really is, there's a lot of variation and a lot of assessment that goes on with each individual position.
The third variation of that could be in between that is that at the beginning of the year, we've budgeted for a position. It stayed vacant through our first interim, so we haven't spent the money. We would recoup that money, but it could still continue to be a vacancy because we've identified that we're still going to continue to try to fill that position in those outlying months. So there's really 3 different ways of looking at the vacancies.
So would you say that a vacancy list would kind of also give us an idea of potential savings?
Again, with evaluation,
Yes.
it could give you some, yeah.
Do you think it's possible that we can get a list of vacancies for classified and certificated? I understand that this list may be flexible or fluid depending on the need of what's going on, and it can change.
I would just have concerns because that is personnel and is attached to employees, and I'm not certain how that would.
If they're open, I mean, there's no
Align.
one on there.
I guess I'm not clear what that information is needed for.
Well, in terms of like how much savings that would be, if we're taking consideration that these vacancies are actually worth money. That's why I was asking, like, how are vacancies considered in the budget, right?
Sure. So that is brought forward when they bring the first interim and second interim. That is in the first term, they will claim this number of vacancies and this was their dollar amount. So that is shared with you as kind of a whole number, not a list of every one of them with the dollars amount. It's brought as a total number of FTEs and here's the savings. So that is shared at the first interim and is shared here as well.
For the
I'm
second
not sure if that's
interim?
answering.
Yeah.
Is there,
It's on slide.
We've been working on that, like Tina said, in the course of the year. There's a current, where we're down to now for the most part is a current vacancy list of, oh, thanks, sorry. Yeah, we've been doing that all year. And where we're at now is we're at a small condensed version of our vacancy list of all the open positions right now that working through with all the supervisors, they've said, this person's moved, we need a IA, this person's moved, we need a HVAC person. And so those are the ones that, like we talked about last time, that are currently flying because the question was asked, why are these flying when you're doing layoffs? So to remind you, the layoffs are for the 25-26 and the current openings are for now. So we have, over the course of the year, pretty much say we're at about 90% of closing and taking back the money on positions that we have not hired.
The other piece that we could share, and I think we have done it in the past and with previous years, is some kind of an update like quarterly. These are the number of vacancies that are current vacant, and HR is attempting to hire, and just kind of give you that update where we are with our hiring process. Because I think at any day in the year we always have vacancies, and so we could give you kind of that snapshot periodically throughout the year how we're doing on filling positions and where we are.
Yeah,
I know we try to do that at the beginning of the year, specifically with teacher positions. We always try to say, are we 100% filled for the beginning of the year? How many subs? So we could do that periodically too, just to continue to keep you updated how we're doing on managing. But at any day, there will be vacancies.
right.
And slide 11 has the vacancy savings you're requesting.
The what?
Slide 11 has the number of FTEs and the vacancy savings that were attributed to those FTEs, both at first interim and at second interim. So you can see those numbers there.
So those are the vacancies then
Those are the
vacancy
positions that-
savings.
Yeah, those are the positions that we identified that we don't think we're going to fill between
Mhm.
now and the end of the year. And that's the value of what we've removed from the budget.
That gives the classified, right? Is there,
This is combined. This is everything right now. This
combined.
is everything right now.
okay, it just says vacancy savings and the rest on top says
I-
classified, so.
Yeah, I can see how that could get confusing. I apologize. That is total vacancy
I
savings
just
for everything.
assumed it was classified.
I apologize.
Okay, so I think having that clarification is good because there's also a difference in classified and certificated in terms of how many savings.
Yep.
Okay. So I seen that, I think, and understanding that it changes their interim, but there is some costs and savings that goes with it. So having that would be great at the updates quarterly or throughout the year. That's it for questions, rest are comments.
All right, and I don't have any questions, so I think at this point, let's see if there are any public comments, and then we can give our feedback to the staff. So do we have public comments?
Yes, we do. We have one. We have Kate Lee.
Okay, welcome, Kate.
I don't think it's on the mic. Yeah, hit the button.
Just push it real hard until it turns red.
There we
There you go.
It's red now. Okay. That sounds like it. Good afternoon, trustees, Superintendent Yao, our executive cabinet members, and our teachers and community members at home. CEA would like to address a few things in the second interim. We understand and agree that there are many unknowns right now as to where we will be actually financially and staffing at the end of May and when the 25-26 budget is presented and adopted. So we appreciate the considerations and limitations that the district management has had to contend with in putting together the second interim. We are concerned the tax revenues that are now estimated to be 4.61% instead of the 5% being used as an estimate by CUSD. Yet we do believe that since the tax rolls are continuing to increase this year, it is very likely that it will end up closer to 5.5 or 6% by end of May. We truly appreciate the including a 2% salary increase for 25-26. However, we believe there are other areas of the budget where additional monies are being held that could be used toward a higher salary increase. This would bring us to a level we need to continue to attract and retain teachers, which has been something that has been able for us to do with the raises we've been getting over the last few years, the significant raises we've been getting in the last few years. These fund categories include the 10% increase in health and welfare, books and supplies, although I have to say that category, that fund has really been brought down from previous years when it was in the, $20, $30, $40,000. So we really appreciate that. Looking at that in a more lean outlook. And then in some board reserves. And also in the services and other services and materials. We would like to see more savings and less expenditures on management positions. It's that management numbers don't reduce just like when enrollment's declining, like our teacher positions do. Just really isn't accurate, or that there shouldn't be reductions. When we have our teacher workforce reduced by declining enrollment or budgetary concerns, we continue to have more workload put onto our plates, and we have fewer teachers to complete all the work that teachers are required to complete for the site. Our adjunct duties, our fewer teachers for grade level collaboration and dividing up the work that must be done by grade levels, whether it's planning field trips or making copies and making sure we have everything in place. Okay, I forgot that I would be having a limited time. All right, so there are other things. I will forward that to the board.
But please, yes, do send it to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Just one comment, Aaron. Okay. All right, let's then share any feedback along. Let's just go in the same order. Thank you.
Okay, well, for this, yes, for the budget and so my understanding is that since we and also the layoffs as well, I'm considering maybe the increase the salary and will put us more on the more pressure on the financing, so then it will also negatively affect our layoff plans. Okay, yeah, I guess that's all my comment.
Okay, great. Thank you all. Satish.
Yeah, I think few of these things, it is a little bit of not great, especially the bottom line that the reserve is not, it's continuously staying less than 6%. At least we used to have 6%. We were talking about 15%. We were talking some point of time 10%. Now we are in this 5s and 4s and things like that. And next 4 years, I don't see any change in that, or it's going in a thing, right? So that's a concerning area. Definitely, we need to look into, reduce the spending. I think that because revenue cannot go up, looks like at least. So, and I assume at least a conservative way, what you are calculating this 4.61 and things like that. But let's say, even if it's true, or hopefully it is going to be better, then that's good. So revenue chances are lesser. So the only way is for us to cut the spending, right? So I think let's look into the hiring part of it now. Okay, one side we are talking about layoff and things so that, but at the same time, hiring. Let's be, we don't want to get into each of that thing, but at least I think my view is that we have to be very, very careful. Any position what you are hiring now onwards, till we have a clear plan on that thing, especially what are that high salary range managers or above. Definitely we should be looking into, because that could have definitely an impact. So I don't want to use a word of like a typical corporate word of hiring freeze, but I think we should get into probably that kind of situation. I know that it is hard for us to be predicting how many we need, and because some people could be going it, but at least in the school environment, we have a better stability than in a corporate world, if you see it, because people won't go in between. They will try to stay at least till the end of the year. So I think you have a better way you can predict what could be the need, and see that some needs can be postponed, some other things really, because that's the only way which we can reduce this spending, I think. Because we giving county whatever that plans and things, so that it is not a great thing, because we will have to go back, as Jerry said, that every time when there is a problem, right? So I'm a little worried about overall on that, and this 39 million, what you're talking about, 15%, how to get there. So even if you're not making a 15%, at least a stable way, if we can put one, I think when LCF itself, before we went basic aid, we used to keep that 6%. Now we are getting into 4%. And funding balance also is going down, right? So these are not a great way how we all are managing the money itself. It's bad as a board, I think we feel. So I'm really, I wanted to double click on the spending part of it and see that where we can save and see that I know that you guys are doing a very good job, but probably that may not be good enough for us here, right? So I think again and again when we are going, because every interim we see a difference, or at last time it's a 2 million and now it's going. And another thing is this, we are taking money from the bond to backfill this. So these are, I know probably are doing the right things to address the situation, but I think probably that is not what we need, right? So we are really running between the poles to get the money here, and we have to have some better plan on expense reduction. That's the mic.
All right, thank you, Satish. Sylvia.
So thank you for putting this whole thing together. I appreciate, the creativity in terms of moving some of these things around, and the multi-year budget assumptions being used to look at what it is. The numbers are scary. I agree with my colleague. I hate seeing our reserve less than 6%. Maybe going back to one of my initial questions about like maybe a more conservative number, having different models. I'd be curious. I don't know if there's anyone else on the board that might be interested in that, but being able to see some different modeling, because I just worry that like the current model that we're using is not giving us. I just don't want to be surprised again, So I don't know if the answer to that is having a couple different models using different conservative number or moderate or whatever, but something, I guess that's my thought, so.
Thank you. Ava, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I have it throughout. So thank you both of you and your team for putting this together. As much as this information is, you all have many hours behind it. That's the many questions. I think it's great that there is a line item and there was nothing on it on where it was sale of equipment and supplies that was on there. And right now then the revenue source, it is 160,542. So thank you for putting that in. That was something that have been asked. This was on page 18 in the booklet, by the way. And then on the part on slide 13, how there are 2 students that reside in our district that attends a charter school, and that we have to put aside and transfer $72,000 of property taxes. This goes to show, I agree with Sylvia that it's great that our district only has 2 students, but it also goes to show how charter schools, how much of those funds would take away from our funds to another charter school since they're attending a different district, and how much that cost is. And I'm going to give accolades to Tina for having a great memory, going back in 2020 and 2021, it was like $150,000, $55,000, which is a pretty good chunk of money. And that would probably pay 1.5 teachers, right? I'm just guessing. So kudos for that, for remembering that. And the other part is, let me go back to my conclusion. I believe the first interim, when the information regarding using bond/Measure Z money to pay for the financing loan of our solar panels, we asked for more information because none of the research information showed like what that would look like. if this is something that the district wants to move in that direction of the different iterations, we like to see more of the information behind it in terms of numbers. Because we were just proposing, given a resolution that didn't have any research behind it or numbers. And if this is something, the assumption that you want to move in that direction, I'd like to see that information. I hope, and then the other part is looking at the budget and the March 15th date. I echo with the remarks so far, two of my colleagues emphasizing how come there isn't more cuts to administration. We've had decreases of students, but the number of administrators have increased. And if the deadline is the 15th and our next board meeting is the 13th, that gives like a day for notification or whatever is happening. This is something, it's not the first time that we've mentioned it, and that definitely for sure is not the first time I've mentioned where, how come we're not looking at the cuts the furthest away from the classroom? So I'm hoping that we kind of that there's some consideration of re-looking at that, since we've had, in general trend, we've had a lot more administrators than we did in the past when we had even more students. I understand that there may be some positions that, because of the mental health needs of our students, but in terms of, and some of the changes, so kind of re-looking at that at that level. And I like the idea suggested by Satish with the hiring freeze. What positions that isn't as fluid, to look at what are some things that we have a hiring freeze over. And then keeping in mind with, I think last time I was told our federal funding is about 10%, and that may not change of how much we're getting of our budget, right? So, you know, how can we anticipate and prepare for that? If that was to come to be, and looking at what are some of the funding, and of course, this is all up in air. Who knows if the state will step in and cover some of the stuff, because I know in the past, like the free and reduced lunch, after a couple of years, the federal funding was funding it, but some of that dropped off. And I know our state of California stepped up and filled in that void. And this is how likely our program for our food services are able to be self-funded in that sense. So kudos to Nicole for keeping that up. I think, and then I look forward to reconvene at the budget subcommittee, and to do that before the interim, to have more budget subcommittee meetings. So thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Ava.
Mhm.
Let's see. For me, I'll echo everyone's thanks here for great presentation. There's a lot of complexity and nuance to communicate. Y'all did a really good job in getting that through to us. So thank you for that. You know, the sense I get in looking at this, and I support this, my comments are really for staff as you prepare the 25-26 budget, not really on this particular report, is that I feel like, you know, we are asking our staff to do a lot, to be very flexible. I think there's a, you know, so there's that part of it. I can see the creativity here in finding pennies under the couch and looking for the 0.1 or 0.2 FTE to move things around. And I think y'all are really good at this. And, you know, I can really see the work here. But at the same time, what I'm seeing here with the projection, right, is that we build in 2% for next year. I don't know, you know, that's what it's going to be. We have 0 for the outlying years, and we're looking at a reserve of 4%. And so clearly, I'm not sure there's that many pennies in the couch to find, or to even with the hiring freezes and all this other kind of stuff. That's my sense. And so I think one thought I would just throw out there for staff to explore is to think about what are we doing now that maybe we would not do? And I know it's hard because we have services, we all want to provide more services. There's a lot of need out there. And we've grown, we saw during the January board advance, right? We introduced a lot of new services and programs over the last couple of years. But what I'm looking at here is, I don't see how, and there's uncertainty, and I hope the tax rolls go up and all that. But even if it did, I think there are places where we can spend that. So I'll just, kind of throw that out there, right? In addition to optimizing the small things, just to think about what are maybe the big rocks that we may need to kind of dial back on. I have a couple of areas I want to throw out there. The first one is been echoed here is around certificated management. So back 5 years ago, again, data from the board advance, 5 years ago, if you look at director and above, we had 12 positions. Right now we're at 17 positions. So it's a 40% increase in 5 years at the same time when the enrollments decline. And again, I know that that's not a function, right? The number of so certificate in management isn't necessarily a function of the students, but at the same time, I think that's an area that I would just like to understand a bit more about. A second one is, again, I hate to say these things, but special education is an area where we're spending a lot of money. I remember when I first joined the board back in 2018, that was when the previous board was working on that. That was one of the projects that was sort of winding down as some of us joined back then. And I wonder if that might be an opportunity. And again, I know there are needs out there, but at the same time, it's a zero-sum game, and whatever goes in there doesn't go someplace else. Another area, and again, this is maybe a little fuzzy, is I wonder if there are opportunities for efficiencies in how we do things. When I talk to folks, there are often ideas, and these may be pennies, I don't know, but I think an opportunity to work with our staff to understand, are there ways to do things, perhaps more standardization, those sort of things to avoid the duplication. And then a fourth one, and I'm going to maybe sort of, have a different thought on hiring freezes, is that I'm supportive of hiring freezes for work that doesn't need to be done. But if there are hiring freezes where we freeze and then we end up hiring contractors to do the work, then we end up costing more. So generally, I support that, but maybe with a thought of, are this work, if we froze it, then are we bringing in contractors to do this? So that's sort of one thought about just generally sort of cuts in that area. And I think that's probably where most of our work is. I'm not looking to reduce personnel spending. I mean, I ran the numbers here. If you look at on page 14 of their printed report, we're at about 85% of personnel benefits and compensation, which is about, that sweet spot we try to hit. So I'm not really looking to eliminate that, but really trying to see if we could reinvest some of that money in some of these areas. So that's one. The second is, I know we also have projects to bring additional revenue. We've talked about potentially leasing out this site. And so to the extent that we can accelerate that, that would be great to, again, relieve the pressure on anything that we would need to cut. So I'll just kind of, there's a couple of things in mind, but that's just that general pool of some of these revenue, right? Because they are going to be measured in millions. And I think lastly, just a comment on the solar is that I think, at least my recollection when we passed that, or at least my recollection, was that because there wasn't a Measure Z, so I wasn't thinking that we would be using Measure Z money to be paying for that. That it would be, and I think then later there was a sort of, oh, maybe because trying to make the numbers fit. So I would like to have that come back as an explicit discussion. I'm not opposed to it necessarily because of the difficulties we're in, but I like that to be an explicit decision as opposed to just there somewhere. So those are sort of general thoughts. It's pretty challenging. I hope the numbers turn out better in the coming months, but these are just some of my thoughts on, how to kind of prepare for the next year's budget. Okay, thank you. All right, any comments for anybody else on this before we move on?
May I just maybe as a closing, just, really thank you and appreciate the feedback for that. And of course, staff will take that back. And, just the assurance from that when we do look at any kind of reductions or staffing, what we really have tried to do is shift away from just looking at numbers and really looking at, we have 4 district priorities. We have, what we are building towards. And so trying to align that. So, as this first round of reductions came through, that was really the lens that we looked at as what are our 4 district priorities and what are those areas that we could begin to trim away from. We're next round. I know there's an emphasis on certificated management, and that will be something that we will definitely look at. But we also look at all the new programs that we have offered and provided. And I think they're so valuable for students, our ELOP program. But that does come with some management oversight. And so we do try to balance all of that. But we also are in a position as, our focus is on portrait of a learner. We're very excited about AI in education. And so there may be some of those things that we've been offering that we just no longer need to or want to or fit into our priorities. And so that'll be an ongoing activity for it. And it will take time. I don't think it will all align within a year, but I think over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, some of those pieces are going to start shifting away and our focus will really be aligned into, those 4 priorities that we have. And, we still are carrying some things that we used to do or feel like were so important, but maybe they're not so important anymore because maybe they're covered under our new priorities and in a different way. And so it does take time. And that would be my ask of the board, happy to bring back plans. But, I think as you know me, I'm not a 1-year planner. I really am about that long term, 3 to 5 years to get us to where we'll be. And I don't think any of us are comfortable with the reserves where they are. And so we know that we have work to do. And I am optimistic that when we come back in May or in June, that this will look very different, or at least we'll have a plan that will be looking different in the future.
Thank you. All right, then moving on to section 5, item 5.1. This is reduction of classified staff due to lack of work and lack of funds. Is there a staff intro or?
Sure. So I will just add that last week when we did bring the resolution, there has been a new updated resolution that is attached to board docs. And I know between that time that HR had been, they met with CSEA, did some of those adjustments. And so you will see on tonight's resolution, it's a much lower number than it was last week, but the savings are still equivalent to what we projected last week. And is built into that second interim. What's happened with this resolution, the vacancies are taken off the resolution, but the money is still accounted for into our second interim savings. So you'll see fewer FTEs, but the impact that we were still hoping to achieve is the cost savings is still in place. You just don't see it on this resolution particularly. So I'll turn it over to Dwayne.
This is an action discussion.
This is discussion action, so we can discuss and then. Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah, so, great.
Okay. Well, thank you. Stacy gave a nice precursor to the work that we did today. We were talked about last meeting. We had made arrangements to meet with CSEA today, based on our last meeting. And what we did today, they came down and we kind of talked about our plan of what we wanted to do sitting together today and collaborating. And we talked about the proposed layoffs, and CSEA expressed that they were concerned with the number of layoffs. And so we listened to their concerns, and we heard what they had to say, and then we split our own ways and went into our own caucus. And at that point, we took a deeper look at their concerns. And one of the things that we came up with, and I believe that we had a pretty good conversation about it with them, is that we expressed to them that the people in this scenario, this layoff scenario, is based on seniority and their current or other classifications that they may have worked in prior, may recover some or all of their reductions that are happening to their positions through either bumping or occupying a current vacancy. And that's what I had expressed to you guys before, that as we worked, after you, deliver the notices, we would go with CSEA and sit down and work over this and try to mitigate the damage to people's jobs. And so the recovery that we will do is, sitting with the employees face to face and showing them the possibilities of where they would have choices, that they may bump into a like position. They may have an opportunity to go into another position that only takes an hour away from them. They may, there's all kinds of opportunities that they can have. And I think we clarified with them that the only way that this can happen is if we go through the process of the layoff, because the layoff allows people to have choices on where they go and to, either decide they want to take the layoff and have the layoff rights, or they want to look at bumping to another level or bumping a person from another classification because they used to be in the classification. And these, we can't play out these scenarios with the folks unless we go through the process. Otherwise, we could say, well, we're going to administratively transfer you to an open position. But if they don't want that position, say they don't want to work at that school, maybe they don't want to work at that job, then they don't have any other fallback opportunities based on the bumping or the protections that you get with the layoff. And so, I feel like we heard each other. I felt like it was collaborative. I felt like, the district felt like they were listening, that they understood our point of view, that we were able to show them that we're doing this in earnest and we care about the employees. And, so that's where we're at. And Stacy eloquently said that now this is at 10.752 FTE, but it's still, like I said last time, this still is spread across 21 employees with an adjustment of 30 minutes to 2 hours into their schedules. And additionally, there were three, on here, there are 3 FTEs that are management positions. If you take off those management positions, because this equals everything that's on here, you're only looking at like 7.5 FTE reductions in CSEA. And we took off the after a lot of conversation, we took off the vacancies because we didn't necessarily have to go through that process for vacancy. You just take the vacancy off, you recover the money. It still is at the 2 million that we had talked about on the first resolution and one. So like I said, I thought it was a very effective collaborative conversation. And so that's what I'm bringing forward on this new resolution for the for the reduction for lack of funds, lack of work.
All right.
The other piece too, I think just adding with classified reductions, the difficult part for it is because it affects many more people than actually the number of layoff notices because of the bumping, whether they bump up or bump down. And so, the initial round of who's notified and then as they begin the bumping. So it does affect a lot of people. And, I think that's important to recognize. And, as soon as these are issued, one of our primary priorities is trying to find a new position within the district, whether sometimes it's a higher number of hours or a higher paying, which is great. Oftentimes, it may be very similar, but at a different site, or it could be at a lower paying one. But, I think that is one area that we try to work very diligently with CSEA is to find a position for these people, because whether it's a small reduction or not, it does affect people's life. And I think that's so important. These are our employees and, they're important to the family.
We feel like since we made the change last year to do seniority by date of hire, not by hours worked, it's even a more fair process for somebody who's been here longer. So it's some of our people will, you know, it's a more fair process based on the date of hire than it is hours of work.
All right, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Stacy, for that update. So let's do a round of questions and we'll see their public comments and then we'll comments or take action or whatever. So Long, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and have a couple of questions and say how much dollars do we save if we
It's a little over 2 million with the projected.
Okay, I see. Say, another question is say if they you mentioned only if we go through this process and then they can take some internal other positions, right? So if we do not take this position, this process, and we cannot do that.
That's correct. They would have to, if you don't go through the layoff process, and they get laid off, they would have to then turn around and apply like an outside person. But if they go through the layoff process, they could bump into another spot. They have the opportunity as a priority to pick one of the other positions that they're you know, qualified to do. If they were in a classification, say that they were an IA or a BI before this, and they were something else, they would have the chance to bump back down into the BI and be guaranteed a job. So the process, the layoff process is made to give the employees rights and privileges that they wouldn't have if they just decided to operate on their own.
Okay, thank you. And another question is this, say if we, let me see. Oh, I guess I'll come back. Sorry.
Oh, sure, no problem. Satish.
Yeah, I have, so the question here is like, we are still saying 21 position, okay? And 17 point, I think 18 point something was last time we were showing, and now it's 10.752, right? So
Yes.
there is about 8 or 7 reduction here in FTE. Is it by taking out the vacancies, or
Yes.
is it truly you did something more?
Taking out the vacancies.
Removing the vacancies.
So you had roughly about 7 vacancies, 7 or 8 vacant positions. Okay. So I know you generally you mentioned about your discussion with CSEA, and you got some ideas and things like that, but that is not directly reflecting anything here then, right?
It's not reflecting anything different on the resolution, but I feel like it's now reflecting a better understanding of the district and CSEA working together, knowing that we have the best interests of the employees at heart. So they got to see today, they got some of the questions answered that they didn't have. We showed them some more things that they didn't have. So they were more able to understand how this is going to work and think about it in their own head. And then we're set to meet on Friday to work our way through the effects of this and the bumping.
Okay. The second question is this bumping or reapplying things, like what's a typical timeline? How long, how many weeks or months they get it once this happens? This starts from March 15th or this starts after June, or when is it?
Okay, so we have to notice them prior to March 15th. Then we set up a meeting. They have to be noticed of their rights. Then we meet with them. And so that might take a couple of weeks.
Okay.
To get all that set up, because as Stacy said, maybe 3, you know, if there's 3 layoffs, it might mean 15 notices, because you have to notice the person who's being bumped, the person there could potentially bump, the person they could potentially bump, so on and so forth. So it's more in depth than just the folks that are involved here.
It often is kind of a domino effect because I could come in and bump you, Satish, but then you have rights to bump Jerry, and then Jerry has rights to bump Sylvia. So it does take the duration of the spring to oftentimes settle that. And oftentimes there may be during that time, we may have people leaving their positions. And so it recreates a new position that's available. So it's a lot of moving parts. But by this resolution, at least triggers us so that we can begin to have those conversations.
And the vacancies which we showed last time, they are not going to be filled. You had some 7 vacancies.
Those
FP,
positions are gone.
they're gone.
They're gone.
So if at all you have to have a new opening, you have to reopen a rec.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, so those.
Reallocate money to it, reopen it, reallocate money to it.
Thanks.
All right, thanks. Sylvia.
Can you actually define bumping? Because you keep talking about bumping. And I think I understand what it is, but can you actually give me an actual definition of what it is?
So I'll just give you an example. Say Tina is a IA, but she also had experience. She's a BI, but she also had experience as an IA. If she gets laid off out of her BI position, she has a choice. She can say, yes, I'll take the reduction of however many hours or whatever. Or she can say, I want you to try to make me as whole as you possibly can. So then she has experience as an IA. So if she was hired in March of 2010, she would go over to, there's a list of hires from the earliest to the most recent. She would find out where she's at in that group. She would fit right in at that spot, and then people would bump down according to their hire date in order to bump down the least senior.
So basically, it's a process in which a CSEA employee can be reinstituted through a seniority process.
The seniority means something, yes.
Okay.
So in order for them to be as close to being as whole, because that's when I mean whole, it's whatever their hours were.
Okay.
If they were a 7-hour person and they're going to be reduced an hour, they have the opportunity to take the reduction, go try to find another person that they have more seniority over in that class. They can bump that person if they have more seniority. Than that person who gets bumped has the same rights and privileges then, again, using their seniority.
Okay.
And they may have another class that they worked in. So that bumps them over to the other class if they don't want to take where they land. So it's very complicated.
Is it related to, because I know there's been some questions about like, we're reducing hours here, or we're, removing positions here, but then at the same time, we have openings that are listed.
Yeah.
Is that connected because it's about like, they can move into that position, or can you help me just understand why those are simultaneously
So the vacancies that are existing now are vacancies for the 24-25 school year. At some certain point, we're going to decide whether we take them off the books, move them forward, or whatever. But right now, we're only dealing with 24-25 with the vacancies. The layoff is for 25-26. If somebody's going to be laid off and all of a sudden we decide that we're going to carry over these vacancies, then we would look to put them in the vacancy. Otherwise, they would have to bump into another person or another classification.
Okay, thank you. That helps me understand that.
Clear as mud.
I want to ask about the timing, because I know we're coming right up on this March 15th date. Just from a process point of view, like, why is it coming to us so close to the date? Like, is it from a planning point of view, were we not able to start earlier? I just think about especially for our employees and being able to give them some peace of mind and just help me understand
there's a lot of reasons. One of the reasons you know, we're waiting to get the staffing. You know, we're looking at the staffing. We find out we're coming in less, so then we need less help. We're also looking at, you know, what we're doing with some of our programs. You know, we're combining, you know, with Cooper Doodle. So that opens up some new things that we've just started talking about. And then, you know, it's families leave, you know. We don't need as many people. We are putting together the master schedules at the point, you know, because we have to wait for the numbers. So, I mean, it's all of these things that do these, you know, that's why March 15th is kind of the deadline. I mean, we could start it way earlier, but it's like creating more panic earlier. And then people are panicked longer. So, I mean, we're trying to make it as easy on people as we can and be more sure about the moves we make the closer to the time limit.
And it is that fine balance because, you know, one of them is that we do want to give notice to employees as soon as possible because some may choose not to stay in the district and do the bumping. They may want to go out and speak. And we know that, you know, February, March, April are the prime hiring times. The other piece too is the earlier we provide notice, the more layoff notices we would be providing just as coverage because there are some of those unknowns. So we're just doing class configurations based on enrollment, our projections that we start getting in January. So as soon as we have them, we start the process. We started this actually back in November, December, looking at all of our programs, what are our projected numbers, and we generate lists of, okay, here's some possible reductions that we can do. We go back and talk to management about, you know, what is the impact if we go this route of this layoff, get feedback from them. So it really is this ongoing process so that we can refine the list as much as possible. And what is the least impactful for us? What are we knowing that, you know, we see some layoffs on this form that we know there's going to be an impact because there may be still some of the work associated with them, and someone's going to have to pick that up. And so those are all the pieces that we try to weigh and see, you know, where is that fine balance that we can get to where we need to be, but least impact the classrooms, least impact the programs and services. And then, you know, it's not a perfect list. We know that because now it kicks off that next process as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm just thinking about like for future. Like I know, like, especially for some of the positions that are going from 12-month to 10-month, like I think they're going to be missing a deadline for the summer assistance program. And so, which is, I think, March 1st. So
I don't believe that they would have qualified.
Okay. All right.
I can't bet 100%, but I know what their starting salary is.
Okay.
I believe they'd be over that threshold.
They would be. I believe so.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's good to know. I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
Like, you know, moving forward.
The other shift too is, you know, I think is still that adjustment because, you know, looking in hindsight and reflection, when we used to bring layoff, you know, it did change 2 years ago for the March 15th.
March 15th.
So we used to do simultaneously kind of the classified and certificated reductions at the same time. It was always January, February. But with classified, we had that additional time because it was 60 days prior to the end of the year, which really gave us about another 5 weeks. Now everything is pushed back. And so it is a much more condensed calendar that we have.
Yeah.
So timeline for us to bring forward is typical, but we may need to look at how could we bring it back even earlier because classified is a little bit more process intensive than certificate.
Right, because the domino effect is so much more.
Yeah.
My third question, I think, is like with the parent-funded positions. Just, I'm thinking back to when I was a PTO president and trying to remember like when we had to give our budget to the district. And I know that like the parent organizations are fundraising throughout the year. So when do they have to have their budget decided by? Is it like, I want to say February or January? Do you like, and does that make a difference in terms of, is it always year to year? Or is there like, yeah, I guess, is it always year to year or do you take into consideration their reserves, those kinds of things?
So in alignment with HR's deadlines that they put in place, we actually worked with each one of the parent groups to give them estimates for 25, 26 back in January. December and January. And basically at that point, what we do is we give them preliminary estimates of if they were to take their current funded positions and they were to continue them in 25, 26, based on the best information that we have at this time, this is how much it would cost. And so then that way the parent groups were able to make the decisions along the same timeline as what they could or could not potentially afford or choose to fund for 25, 26. So all those timelines are kind of aligned.
Okay.
One thing that this whole year dealing with, trying to get our parent groups all aligned with how to operate this, how to work through it. It's what I've run into since we've talked about eliminating some of these, an hour here, an hour there, a position that's parent funded. It's hard for parent groups to understand that when they fund a certain position, that even though they're paying the dime, those are our employees, and that they actually have to go through the same process as them. So some of them feel like they can just say, well, I don't want to fund this anymore. I want to fund an hour here. So I want to take an hour away from here and do it here. And we can't do that. We still, even though somebody else is paying the dime, we have to run them through the same process of, because they're seeing, that fundraising goes like this. And some of the groups are right in here now, and they're realizing that paying for personnel as we get these substantial raises and costs of benefits go up, that it's expensive. And so a lot of them think we can just quit because that's our money, that's our club's money, but we still have to operate as though those are our district employees. So I know Allison and all of us have been talking about, a consistent message and a training for the parent groups. And I think that will help have people understand that, when you commit to personnel, it's a big commitment. And somebody has to pick up the dime if you decide you don't want to do it. And if the district's in a position, then we can. But if the district's not in a position, because usually the parent funded positions are above and beyond what the staffing is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ava. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time and meeting with our CSA representatives. So my understanding is that the vacancies were taken off and they're not going to be existing anymore. So is that the reason why we're still a little bit over $2 million in terms of
It's still the same from the original resolution, even though we took the vacancies off, the sum is still the same.
The savings is still approximately 2.2 million that was built into the second interim. It's just the vacancies don't
The
have to go
vacancies are
through.
not on there, but we are
Still
basically
recouping the money from those
recouping the
vacancies.
money, basically not, like if there was postings for those vacancies, those postings are no longer existing.
There were no postings for those vacancies.
Okay, there were no postings, so
Yeah.
that is part of that, and that's why the money is still the same, even though
Yes.
we have reduction. I
Correct.
do want to say thank you for labeling which positions are vacant and which are actual positions currently occupied. My question is, can we have in the future, if we are looking into budget cuts or like having a retirement incentive to be earlier? And I concur, like maybe by a month, because I can understand and I can't imagine with the whole bumping system coming from a certificated perspective, could we just have like by hire date? And I do appreciate it is more equitable to have seniority based on hire date rather than number of hours, because people work number of hours based on their own situations. So
One thing, if I could answer,
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we are looking into and working on the retirement incentive. And if it, we go through the unions and it's something they agree with, then somebody who has already put in their retirement papers, we'll go back. So they're not going to miss an opportunity to do that because we got this together at a later date.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other reason I was asking about thinking in future years to have maybe earlier by a month in terms of reduction of fourth year, considering looking at the numbers since most career fairs in education happen in March. Thank you. No, that's it.
All right, thanks, Ava. Two maybe just sort of clarification questions. So for the positions that are parent funded, now that they go away, does that take us below some baseline, or were these sort of above and beyond some sort of baseline that we have for services?
So these are above and beyond. So the district funds the positions equitably across the district. And then these are additional positions that the site has identified that they want to have in place.
Got it. Okay. And then for the preschool teachers, what kind of modeling are we doing for how many classes we would have at Meyerholt? So we sort of the lower end, higher end? What's the?
So right now we are based on enrollment. It's not quite filling 5 classrooms.
Okay.
And so we are able to, with our current model that we have with these reductions, we would be able to cover those classes. If enrollment does go up in the fall and we're able to completely fill that classroom, then we may have to come back and rehire an additional teacher back. But along with that would come the income from the parents enrolling in the program to offset that cost.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you. All right, those are my questions. Anybody else along, please go ahead.
So do we have a layoff every year? Or?
Sorry. Our dream would be not to have layoffs in any years. And so we actually have been fairly fortunate in the last couple of years that we haven't had to. I think many of us remember the years prior where we were doing some pretty severe layoffs every year where this number of FTEs would be doubled or tripled. And so, again, we have been very fortunate over the last couple of years of not having to do layoffs other than some of the parent funded positions. But again, due to the budget, we did have to bring them forward this year. So.
Say, I remember, we receive our personnel report in our constant items before, and so are those those are in those reports. There's some hiring or leavings, and for those hirings, are those just filling the vacant?
Filling the vacancy for this year.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And do we have resolutions when we're adding a new position like no?
We just have a need. We put the paperwork through, and we hire based on our, if we have a growth, new kids come in and we have to hire another teacher, then we just talk about it in EC and then talk to Chris, and then we budget for it, and then we put the paperwork through and fly the position.
Okay, I see. So it's more easier to add a new position.
Yeah, we have to do the resolution because you're dealing with people's jobs and salary. That's why you have to do. With adding, you don't need to.
Okay.
But if we reduced them, we would have to.
Okay, I see. So and how does our salary increase have the impact on the layoff?
I think in the big picture of it, when our salaries are going up, it's one of the, it has the effect on the budget that our budget is going up. So it's indirectly related. We're doing layoffs because our budget we're spending more than we're bringing in. And so layoffs are related in that sense for it. Okay. So we're basing the layoff dollar amount on where they are currently on the salary schedule.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I just had a couple of things. One is this, I thought that when you're having a position, when you're hiring, not necessarily every into detail, but I thought there will be a resolution coming to us, like we'll be hiring some, or we give some blanket kind of things like 30 teachers. There is some kind of an approval you get it from.
It's a consent.
So if it's a director or higher, we've always brought that as to the board for approval.
Mhm.
If it's not, the new hiring is all on part of the personnel report that comes at the first of the month. That is part of the consent items.
Consent items, okay.
That will reflect all the leaving and new hires.
So, Mike, you mentioned about early retirement part of it, right? Like, which we had already a plan on things like that, just you mentioned. So I assume that this has been already socialized with the CA, CSE and
We're
union.
just getting ready to meet with them
Okay,
coming
so,
up. We've had to work with our consultant to
Okay.
get this all figured out. So it's taking a little bit of time.
yeah, so it will come to us after the meeting, or what's the process?
It is because it's concerning some of the contract services that are outlined in the contract. It is negotiable, so we do go through the unions first.
That's the
We're
deal.
hopeful that it could be through an MOU or we'll determine that when we meet with the unions, and then that ultimately come to the board for the final approval. But it does go through the negotiations process.
It's under compensation. That's why it rides under compensation.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Questions?
Comments.
Okay, Ava, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, I don't have any either. Do we have any public comments on this item?
No, we do not.
Okay, all right, let's then go through and comments then, please.
Okay, so yeah, it's hard to see, say we made those layoff decisions. And again, I would like to echo our previous comments, and so we need to be more cautious on the hiring part. Say when we in the future, I would like to say for each hiring, and we need to say have an evaluation. Do we really need it? Is that possible to consolidate? And so that's maybe something not quite so easy from your description. So that's maybe some administration part and make it not too easy, but I would like to say we also need to talk with union negotiations and make the process like those consolidate position, make it easier. So in this way, it's actually benefits the union as well, so benefits us and everyone. And we can do more flexible consolidations in the future.
Okay, thank you. Satish?
Yeah, I think, the layoff is not an easy thing, and I think I already shared that last meeting, but looks like we are hitting this budget crisis anyway. But I'm very happy that you had already a discussion with the CA. Okay, so that is important, and getting into much more on a consensus is much more better than being. And I hope this will work good both the sides. Okay. But again, I think based on one more point which I wanted what Tina brought up, right? I think this budget situation, we will have to. I'm linking this both and for the future also. So I think we have to be very, very agree with you on this, how you are hiring and things like that, and see that possibility, the effectiveness of the organization better maybe, because that will really, today, instead of using a word lack of work or lack of funding is one thing. Lack of funding is coming definitely because there's a budget crisis, but I think lack of work is not a good thing. So we have to see the organizational efficiency for sure. Again, suggestions, not, I'm sure like you must be looking into that, but I think that will definitely help us on the hiring process overall. So we have to be much more cautious, and hopefully whatever you said, Superintendent, that we did not do last 2 years, but we do not want to do future also. So the only to avoid that, as well as the budget healthiness, I think we need to really work on. Expense reduction is definitely an area. So we have to look into what it is. And I'm really interested in understanding that early retirement portion as well, because that is going to help us a lot on this kind of issue, and especially, higher salary people, in the hierarchy, whatever, right? I don't want to mention specifically director or manager, but definitely who's making more money, definitely see that like how we can, because a lot of these even 21 numbers are going, but they may be relatively, if you consider their salary low or their hours are low in the other way too. So the number of that number of employees impacted are high versus the benefit could be much lower. So we should take a right approach on that to see that how we can reduce that in the future. That kind. Okay, thank you. Sir.
Yeah, thank you. Sylvie?
I mean, I just want to begin by acknowledging how incredibly difficult this decision is. And I'm sorry that we're in the financial situation that we are, that it requires it. And it's good to see the numbers, and I appreciate that the numbers have gone down, but at the end of the day, it's not numbers on a page, it's people, and it's people in our community who support our students and our schools, and it's their livelihood, and it's going to be impacting them, and it will be impacting our students because they are doing things that support our students. I just want to acknowledge that because I think I have so much respect for all of our staff and all of the people in our community that do the work that they do. And so it's really not an easy decision. It's especially frustrating because we're in basic aid this year and this shouldn't be happening, right? And so it's like this perfect storm of this 1 year is the year that we went up in enrollment. And the property taxes have not gone as much as we thought it might. And it's just really frustrating because if we were still in LCFF, it would actually mean a little bit more funding, but because we're in basic aid, it's less funding per student. And so I don't know, that just is kind of frustrating for me. So thank you for explaining bumping. Thank you for explaining how the whole mitigating the process works. I think it's really important that we support our staff at this time. I'm glad that you'll be working with them to hopefully find a soft place for them to land. I think that's really important. And yeah, I think if we have to do it again in the future, being able to do it with a little bit more planning, a little bit more margin for time would be good. And then I think the other thought I had was with the parent funded positions. I know this has just been challenging for everybody post-pandemic. I think every school is having problems with fundraising. And I remember when I was PTO president, CEF used to do these gatherings of all the different PTAs and PTOs. And we would share best practices. We would talk about different ways we were fundraising. And I don't know if CEF is still doing that, or maybe that's something that can be suggested, or if not, maybe it's something that the district can support. I wonder if there's a way for us to support the parent groups. I don't know, maybe a fundraising workshop or something that just gives them more tools and helps them so that, again, I'm just thinking about that stability, because especially since it's year to year, it just feels like there's so much uncertainty if I'm a position that's funded through parents. So I'm hoping we can maybe do something there to help support that as well. So yeah, I think those are my thoughts as we have to make this really difficult decision.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Yeah.
Ava?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, staff, for putting the time in. And also working with our CSCA and SEIU leaders. Because these are people in their positions, and I'm hoping that there are areas that we will grow and that we may have maybe the same amount of students, hopefully, and not have it reduced. And hoping that our Cooper Doodle program, I like Satish's question because it gives us better insight in terms of what's the enrollment right now. Right now, we have about 4 classes, and hoping that it will increase to 5 so that hopefully we are going to be able to hire back some of these positions. Budget cuts are hard. I also understand it takes a few years for any school district to transition to basic aid, and this is our first year. And I'm hoping that we don't have to do that in the future. perspective wise with the entire county, there are districts at the very least 10 times the cuts that we have to do, at least $20 million. So, and I think I have to thank the previous board member and one of our board members who voted to close down 2 schools and consolidate 1 school. And that has helped in terms of where we are now. I think we would be in a much worse position. But and the question looking forward is like, you know, going forward with the mindset, even though we are basic aid and we're going in there to prevent this in the future, how can we conserve our money? And I've said this before, and I like to be reminded again with Jerry saying, looking at how can we reduce contractors, because contractors do cost more money than if we were hired within. And then like system wise, are there anything where we can cut? And I don't know what kind of systems, but I believe y'all are experts in your departments and where we can do that. And I understand we're looking at our priorities, but maybe looking at positions that we no longer use where times have changed, or maybe the jobs demands have changed. Regarding to CEF, I know that CEF has been working hard to try to get all of the PTAs and PTOs on board, because they're providing the support of a consistent financial system, because they understand each year as parent leaderships change, it'll help with their finances by providing the backbone and the program for actually taking in money and taking out money. So there is a program that they would help on the back end. But I also like the idea if we can provide the space and the time for our leadership groups in working more with CEF and collaborating and providing more information may also help us in the future. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Ava. I think I echo a lot of the sentiments of my board colleagues here. This is a difficult decision. It's an unpleasant decision. You know, when I, first started becoming a manager, I remember one of my mentors shared with me, something I've always remembered, which is when a layoff hits someone, it hits more than that person. It hits the whole family, right? It's potentially a daddy or a mommy going home to tell their kids now that, the work situation is different. So I know this is a really serious thing. And I appreciate the thought that's been put into it. We're in the situation, we were just kind of looking at the second interim, and so, and these cuts, the, second interim report, as bad as it is, it's predicated on having these cuts in place. And so that's something we need to go forward with. Glad to hear that we have this process, and there may potentially be places where these folks could go. And I'm glad we have that process in place. And going forward, hopefully, I don't know what likes this, and maybe we can be in a position where some of these sort of variabilities and staffing needs can be buffered in other ways, so that we don't, need to go through this. But yeah, so that's where I am on this. Okay, so at this point, since this is a discussion action item, I would entertain a motion if anybody would like to make one on the resolution we have ahead of us here, 24-25-17. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I can make the motion.
Thank you, Sylvia. And could I get a second? Is there a second for this?
Clarification, are we moving both or doing one each, since it's 1.1 versus,
Right,
I mean,
we're-
5.1 and 5.2?
Right, we're just doing 5.1, so that
Okay.
would be resolution 24-25-17. Okay. Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Thank you. Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Trustee Zhao,
Aye.
trustee Chow,
Aye.
trustee Leong,
Aye.
trustee Madhato,
Aye.
trustee Lu,
Aye. Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to then item 5.2. It's a comparable item for certificate employees. Mike, is this a brief update or?
Yeah, I'll just kind of reiterate. This is to reduce certificated employees, which is called this is a particular kind of service. There's one on here that is a full FTE, and the others are periods. So the middle school math teacher is 1 period, the middle school PE teacher is 1 period, and the middle school Spanish teacher is 2 periods. And this is based on student enrollment. And so it amounts to 1.80 FTE.
Thank you. Any questions, or maybe Long will just go down and see if there are any questions on this item?
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you. Say, do we have the same process like classified, like a bumping process?
So yes. But what you're dealing here is some of the teachers have a multiple subject, so they can bump wherever there is an opening, or if there's not an opening, then they would use their seniority. They have the same type of seniority hire date to bump out. And some of them have a single subject. So those are the tough ones, because they can only bump a person that has the same subject as them, and they have to have a higher seniority than them. So it's basically the same situation, but like these people with classified, it's an hour. With these folks, it's a period.
Okay, I see. So do we have enough, say, how many vacant positions do we have currently?
Vacant positions?
Yeah, right.
There's all the vacant positions because you've seen on some of the other sheets, like 5 middle school layoffs and other layoffs. We've already moved those because with the legislation on certificated positions, you have to do that prior to giving notices. So we've already moved everybody into the vacant positions. So this is what's left over.
Because again, these positions are laid off at the end of the conclusion of this year. So they're laid off effective June 30th.
Yeah, I see. Thank you.
Thanks, Sashi.
Yeah, I have, so this is like, I know instructional coach is one full time. And all other things are 0.2, 0.2, 0.4. Is it like I know it's a FT equivalent, but is it how many? It translates into how many people? First of all, overall, is it still 1 point? That is like it's 4 people per person.
These are people.
But the 0.2 is one person losing one section. So they currently teach 5 out of 7. They would be able to teach 4 out of 7.
Can repeat that?
So a teacher teaches 5 periods out of a 7-period day.
Okay.
With a reduction of a 0.2, they would then teach 4 sections out of a 7-period day.
So it is
if they
truly
chose to
they are
stay in
not
that
getting
position.
laid off in the only. It's kind of a reduction in their total.
A reduction in their total.
It's the same
hours.
as with the classified, that they're getting a reduction in an hour here or an hour there. This person is getting a reduction of 0.2 because a full-time teacher is a 1.0. Every period is a 0.2.
Yeah, I understood. But what I'm saying, they are still physically going to be in the system. They are not like unlike the 10.8 or 21 people in the previous one. 21 employees will be out of job actually.
No, so this employee would still be employed if they chose to take the lesser. They would be an 80% employee. They may choose to go outside the district where there's 100% position. So that would be the conversation that Mike would have with them once these go into
And
place.
for clarification, the 21 people that affected in the classified, they're not, all 21 people are not losing a job.
No, if they opt out, means if they don't lose the job, they would lose the job, right? If you're saying, I know we finished that, but still.
Someone may
I'm
at
comparing.
the end of the bumps, the last.
Yeah,
hire.
bumps are, yeah.
Yes, but not these 20.
From the system perspective, that's practically they're coming back in a way, if you see it.
They have a choice to go somewhere.
But here, these people, if they accept it, whoever it is,
They would still be
they'll
employed.
still be part of so physically they are in the system still.
Yes.
If they choose to take the bump.
I see, okay. I think that's it.
I think so.
For the instructional coaches, can you remind me how many are remaining on the team?
So there, I can tell you about the induction coaches. The induction coaches, there's 4 induction coaches. The instructional coaches, Allison can talk about, but this instructional coach here, that's this reduction, that was part of a special program that we had that didn't really take off. And this person will have an opportunity to go back in the classroom because they possess the teaching credential. The only reason it shows is because there was a stipend that went with it. And we have to show that as a layoff because that has to do with monetary. So this person loses the stipend for being an instructional coach, but goes back to a teaching position.
I see. Okay. All right.
I think so, Eva.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I think this is an additional question to what Satish was inquiring regarding the vacant positions. Like you were talking about how you have to fill or take care of the vacant positions before coming to reduction and force.
Yes.
Were there any certificated management that had to go into a vacancy of like regular certificated beforehand?
If a manager decides, like a principal say,
Yeah.
if they're a principal and they taught in the district prior and were tenured,
Mm-hmm.
then they're tenured and
Okay.
we owe them a position. If they come from outside of the district and they work here for 3 years, then we owe them a position. So there have been in the past, as you guys know, other principals who have decided they wanted to go back into the classroom. So if we have that, we will have to we owe them a position, and that may displace the most junior person in a particular job.
They have to be in the district though, right? You can't have someone outside the district. Okay, I get it now. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. And I don't have any questions. It's been asked. So any other questions? If not, are there public comments on this item?
Yes, we do. We have one.
Okay. Let's.
The first speaker is Kate Lee.
Welcome.
Hi. Fortunately, I signed up for 2 sections, so I can finish what I was going to bring up because it is tied together. So the certificated staff reductions shown in the budget slides tonight are a much more accurate portrayal of the number of wonderful teachers that will be either losing a position this year or next year, or have their position reduced. And so the actual number that are being affected is 11.1. Not 1.8. And that's on the slides that show the certificated and the classified. Now, these teachers will have an opportunity to go into other job positions that are available. However, their job that they're currently in, the position they're currently in, is not going to be available to them. So we will have a bumping process as well in CEA. So I know that's not required to show that in the resolution, because it's not a difference in salary necessary for them. But I think that it's important for you to understand that it's 11.1 positions that are being shifted and changed or disappearing. And so, and just also those people who, like, if there's a 0.2, that will then be that they're losing in a section or a period in middle school, they will be offered. So they're not going to have to stay at an 80% if they're already 100% or full-time. They'll be offered other sections, maybe an elective section, wheel, or maybe even an elective at another middle school site. So it's not that they'll be forced to move to, I'm hoping I'm getting this right, but I just wanted to make sure that the board understood that. They won't be forced to move into a 0.8% or 80% instead. they'll have a lot of different options and they may choose to go to another district. But we will lose teachers over this either, through our temporary teachers who won't be asked back or through teachers who have been here a long time and don't have the options that they would like. I know that it's very difficult to make these cuts, that the budget constraints don't allow us to have all the job positions that are really needed by our students. I think it's really important to understand that. And that we are choosing, it's a really difficult choice, but we are choosing to not provide these people and services to our students and families. In the budget reports and information that we requested from the district and received from the district, we did not see any document from SCOE that was signed off requiring the district to send a fiscal stability plan. Perhaps that was not shared with us, but typically, if you fall in a category, you have to send it, but we did not see that from the district. And it's important to understand that these vacant positions they're needed positions, even though they're being eliminated. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, see any sort of comments or? Feel free, I
Okay.
guess, yeah.
I remember on the say winter advance, and we mentioned we have two elective periods right now, and so that actually saved 16 or 18 positions. Yeah.
Teachers.
Right, so it's I'm really happy we have we made something and we did something to reduce the possible reductions and by providing more services, and that's a greater initiative.
I don't have anything. I think it's kind of the same repetition of whatever I had, but I think this is a good point what you brought up long. I think I should have thought. Yeah, that is definitely good. 18 personnel or 18 teachers were able to keep that's pretty good actually. And in a way, it's not just keeping; it is giving services. It's directly benefiting the kids also. Let's put it that way as well. I think from that point, if you're taking, that's good. And we have already readily available teachers, and ratio as well as 2 electives really helped actually from that. Thank you.
Thanks.
And just very similar to what I said earlier. I mean, it's very much true. It's people's livelihoods and and it's impacting students, and it's awful that we have to do it.
Eva?
So it's good to hear that we've, as a district, we've mitigated so that it isn't, more than what we have of 1.8. I think the perspective of, we, as a board, we made a priority of trying to be more equitable with the elective classes in terms of having that more, at all of our middle schools so that there are 2 electives. I know we are working on the transition class, but that was a priority. And I mean, it's a perspective. The other perspective is like, if we're trying to reduce the amount of layoffs, it could also be something that can be done through negotiations, which is, class size and all that stuff, or schedule, or but that's all under negotiations. That's a different category that's not. The only thing that we do is if we approve or disapprove whatever the final negotiations. But with anything, even with 1.8 positions, it will have an impact in our community. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, they're very much the same sort of feelings as the previous item. I recognize there are impacts on the students. But again, this is, the second interim is predicated on this, and so it's unpleasant, but yeah, let's look to the future to see if we can reduce these in the future. Yeah, so okay, public comments. Okay, is there a motion? Does anybody like to make a motion for this resolution?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Satish, and can I get a second, please? Thanks, Long. Roll call vote, please.
Trustee Zhao,
Aye.
trustee Chow,
Aye.
trustee Leon,
Aye.
trustee Manhattan,
Aye.
trustee Lou.
Thank you. All right, then next item is adjournment. I'll go ahead and adjourn the special meeting at 8:14.